Before diving into the story, here is the power scale classification that governs the world, categorized by sub-stages: low, mid, late, peak, to denote the grueling climb of martial cultivation. 1. Apprentice realm: low, awakening of bodily potential. Can defeat 2 to 3 adults. Barely stronger than a normal human, but faster reflexes. Mid, muscle memory solidifies. Strikes carry weight. Late, breath and movement synchronize. Can fight 5 to 7 untrained men. Peak, the absolute limit of normal flesh before blood refinement begins. 2. Blood refining realm: low to peak, the marrow produces enriched blood. Skin becomes tough as leather, low, to hard as wood, peak. Infinite stamina compared to mortals. 3. Meridian opening realm: low to peak, opening the 12 primary energy pathways. Speed triples. Strikes echo like thunder. Internal chi begins to circulate. 4. Innate realm: low to peak, exchanging mortal breath for innate chi. Energy can be released outside the body, sword light, palm winds. Can walk on water and leap across rooftops. 1. The fading embers of a hero of Sector 4 smelled of rust, damp concrete, and crushed dreams. Rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the corrugated tin roof of the small, 2-bedroom apartment. Inside, sitting in a worn rattan chapter the slums chair, was Rudra. He looked every bit the frail, 70-year-old man the world believed him to be. His skin was weathered, mapped with deep wrinkles, and a heavy woolen blanket covered his knees to ward off the phantom aches of old battle scars. Decades ago, he had been a proud cultivator at the innate realm. He had walked on water, severed steel with his bare hands, and defended the city's borders. But the myriad beast invasion had taken everything. It had taken his beloved wife. It had shattered his danshan, crippling his cultivation down to the frail apprentice realm. For years, the government stipend awarded for his sacrifice had kept his family afloat. But the world of business was as ruthless as the wild. His son, Vivaan, a hard-working man trying to run a modest logistics company, had drawn the ire of the massive Silvercrest Corporation. Using their aristocratic influence, Silvercrest had systematically choked Vivaan's supply lines and bribed officials to freeze Rudra's veteran pension under bureaucratic review. "Dad, your tea," a soft voice pulled Rudra from his memories. His daughter-in-law, Mira, placed a chipped ceramic mug on the side table. There were dark bags under her eyes from working double shifts at the textile mill. "Thank you, Mira," Rudra rasped, offering a warm but tired smile. The front door opened, letting in a gust of cold wind. Surya stepped inside, shaking the rainwater from his cheap, patched jacket. He was a lean boy, just turning 18 today. Despite the exhaustion on his face from his part-time delivery job, his eyes held a fiery, unyielding light. "Grandpa! Mom!" Surya grinned, holding up a small, slightly squashed cake. "I got paid today. And tomorrow is the awakening ceremony at the college." Rudra looked at his grandson, a lump forming in his throat. Surya was the spitting image of his grandmother. The boy carried the weight of their poverty without a single complaint, his heart set on becoming a martial artist to lift his family from the dirt. "You'll do brilliantly, my boy," Rudra said, his voice carrying a hidden weight. "Even if I have to break my old bones to pave the way." Chapter 2, The Coming of Age. The Central Martial College was an architectural marvel of white marble and reinforced glass, a stark contrast to the decaying slums. Standing in the grand courtyard among hundreds of wealthy, silk-clad youths, Surya looked entirely out of place in his faded grey tracksuit. The awakening ceremony was a rite of passage. Students approached the obsidian monolith, placing their hands upon it to stimulate their latent energy. When Surya's turn came, the murmurs from the aristocratic scions grew loud. "Look at that slum rat! Does he even have enough nutrition to awaken a boy with a silver crest pinned to his chest? Sneered. Surya ignored them. He pressed his palms against the freezing stone. He remembered his father's ruined business, his mother's calloused hands, and his grandfather's crippled legs. He pushed every ounce of his willpower into the stone. A dull, earthy light pulsed from the monolith. The instructor, a bored-looking man in his 40s, scribbled on a clipboard. Surya. Bone structure, average. Initial chi pool, sub-PAR. Cultivation level, low apprentice realm. Step down. Next. Surya clenched his fists. It wasn't a genius-level awakening, but he had crossed the threshold. He was officially a martial artist. Miles away, in the damp apartment, Rudra was sipping his tea when a sudden, mechanical chime echoed in his mind. Lineage resonance detected. Grandson, Surya has achieved low apprentice realm. Activating the ancestral shadow system. Rule established, host's cultivation will forever be locked exactly 3 major realms above the designated descendant. Calculating difference. Upgrading host to low innate realm. Rudra dropped his teacup. It shattered on the floor. A terrifying, pristine surge of energy erupted within his withered meridian channels. The agonizing blockages built up over decades dissolved in an instant. The crippled, stagnant chi in his danshan roared to life, converting rapidly into pure, unadulterated innate chi. His bones cracked, realigning, and his cloudy eyes sharpened until he could see the individual wings of a fly buzzing across the room. Chapter 3, A Breath of the Past. Reward, flawless innate breathing technique distributed. Information flooded Rudra's mind. It was a breathing manual so perfect, so aligned with the natural laws of the world, that the techniques he used in his youth felt like child's play in comparison. He slowly stood from his rocking chair. He didn't use his cane. He stepped lightly, and for a fleeting second, his foot hovered a fraction of an inch above the floorboards. The power of the innate realm had returned to him, but it was deeper, vaster, and devoid of any impurities. 3 major realms above, Rudra thought, staring at his trembling, calloused hands. If Surya was a low apprentice, Rudra was now a low innate master. In a city where meridian opening experts were considered elites and innate realm masters were treated like nobility, Rudra was suddenly one of the apex predators of Sector 4. I failed to protect your grandmother, Rudra whispered to the empty room, a dangerous, heavy aura leaking from his body and rattling the tin roof. I will not fail this boy. When Surya returned home that evening, waving a cheap, mass-produced cultivation manual given to all commoner students, he found his grandfather sitting in the exact same spot, looking as frail as ever. Look, Grandpa. The iron form manual. It's basic, but if I master it, I can reach the mid-apprentice realm by the end of the semester. Rudra smiled warmly, his eyes scanning the manual in Surya's hands. With his restored innate level perception and the flawless knowledge the system had granted him, he instantly spotted 13 fatal flaws in the cheap pamphlet. It was designed to keep the poor stagnant. I am so proud of you, Surya, Rudra said softly. Study hard. Rest well tonight. Chapter 4, The Aristocratic Snobs. The first week of college was a brutal awakening for Surya. The gap between the wealthy nobles and the commoners wasn't just financial, it was martial. During a practical combat class, the instructor paired Surya with Julian Silvercrest, the heir to the very company choking Surya's family. Julian was already at the cusp of mid-apprentice realm, fueled by expensive ginseng pills and private tutors. Let's see what the slum rat can do, Julian sneered, cracking his knuckles. He was using a high-tier footwork technique, leaving faint afterimages. Surya fell into the basic stance of the iron form manual. He fought with grit, throwing punches that carried the desperate weight of his family's survival. But grit wasn't enough against superior resources. Julian easily deflected Surya's strikes, sweeping his legs and driving a heavy heel into Surya's ribs. Surya coughed, tasting copper as he was sent skidding across the training mats. The aristocratic students roared with laughter. Form is sloppy. Energy circulation is blocked at the fourth meridian. Pathetic, the instructor critiqued coldly, not bothering to reprimand Julian for the excessive force. Surya, if you cannot grasp the basics, you will be expelled by the midterms. Surya walked home that evening with bruised ribs and a bruised ego. He didn't tell his parents. He just ate his dinner in silence and locked himself in his tiny room to practice. Chapter 5, The Nighttime Revision. Midnight struck. Surya lay asleep on the floor, exhausted from forcing his chi through the flawed pathways of the iron form manual. His breathing was ragged, his brows knitted in pain. The door to his room creaked open silently. Rudra stepped in. In the darkness, the old man's eyes glowed with a faint, ethereal light. Rudra picked up the battered college manual from the desk. He pulled a pen from his pocket. Moving with blinding speed and absolute precision, Rudra began crossing out lines and adding marginalia. He altered the breathing rhythm, shifted the footwork angles by a few degrees, and changed the chi circulation route to bypass the intentional bottlenecks placed by the college. He didn't make it a divine manual. Surya's mortal body would explode if he tried to channel heaven-defying chi right now. He simply made the iron form perfect for Surya's exact physique. Before leaving, Rudra placed a hand over his grandson's chest. A tiny, invisible sliver of pure innate chi seeped into Surya's body, soothing his bruised ribs and warming his exhausted muscles. Chapter 6, A Sudden Breakthrough. Surya woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed. The pain in his ribs had vanished. Sitting cross-legged, he opened his manual to review the morning exercises and froze. The pages were covered in neat, elegant handwriting. Do not force the chi through the liver meridian. Let it pool at the base of the spine, then push upward on the exhale. Surya frowned. Who had written this? His father? No, Vivaan was a businessman, not a cultivator. His grandfather? Impossible, he was a crippled old man. Perhaps a senior student had taken pity on him and sneaked it into his bag? Curiosity winning over caution, Surya followed the handwritten notes. He breathed in, pooling the meager chi at his spine, and exhaled sharply. Crack! A sound like a popping bamboo shoot echoed in his body. The stagnant energy rushed through his pathways like a undammed river. Black, foul-smelling impurities sweated out of his pores. He felt his muscle fibers tighten, his senses sharpen. He threw a punch at the empty air. Whoosh! The wind cracked. Mid-apprentice realm, Surya gasped, falling backward in sheer disbelief. He had broken through in a single morning. In the living room, Rudra was pouring a cup of hot water. Ding! Descendant Surya has reached mid-apprentice realm. Upgrading host to mid-innate realm. Rudra exhaled. A wave of localized air pressure flattened the dust motes in the room. He smiled, taking a sip of his hot water. Chapter 7, The Alleyway Ambush. While Surya was progressing, Vivaan's troubles were multiplying. The Silvercrest Corporation had grown tired of Vivaan's stubborn refusal to sell his small logistics warehouse. That evening, as the rain poured over Sector 4, Vivaan was walking home from the tram station. The street lights flickered and died. 3 men stepped out from the shadows of a narrow alleyway. They wore dark raincoats, but their auras were heavy. They were cultivators. Low-blood refining realm thugs, hired muscle from the black market. To a normal man like Vivaan, they were invincible monsters. Vivaan, the lead thug hissed, twirling a heavy steel pipe. Mr. Silvercrest sends his regards. He thinks your legs are what's keeping you from signing the contract. We're here to help you sit down permanently. Vivon backed up, dropping his briefcase, his heart hammering in his chest. I won't sell. That business is my son's future. Then your son can push your wheelchair, the thug laughed, lunging forward with terrifying speed, the steel pipe aiming directly for Vivon's kneecap. Chapter 8, The Shadow Guardian. The pipe never connected. A hand, old, calloused, and seemingly frail, caught the steel pipe in mid-air. The thug blinked. Standing between him and Vivon was an old man in a cheap woolen sweater. Dad! Vivon cried out in horror. Run! Old fool, you want to die first! The thug snarled, trying to yank the pipe back. It didn't budge. It felt as though it was clamped in the jaws of a mountain. Rudra didn't even look at the thug. His eyes were cold, staring into the dark rain. To threaten a man's family in the dark, it is the behavior of vermin. Rudra squeezed his hand. A pulse of invisible mid-innate chi surged from his palm. The solid steel pipe groaned, crumpled, and then shattered into metallic dust that washed away in the rain. The three thugs froze, their eyes bulging. To crush steel into dust required internal force beyond their comprehension. Meridian. Meridian opening expert, the leader stammered, taking a terrified step back. Leave, Rudra commanded, his voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed like a thunderclap in the thugs' minds, striking directly at their souls. The sheer martial pressure of an innate master forced the three thugs to their knees, blood leaking from their noses. They scrambled up, screaming in terror, and fled into the night. Rudra turned, his aura vanishing instantly, replacing the apex predator with a frail grandfather. He swayed slightly, leaning heavily against the alley wall. Dad! Are you okay? Vivon rushed forward, catching him. How did you do that? I thought your cultivation was crippled. A sudden burst of adrenaline, my boy, Rudra wheezed, acting perfectly breathless. And they were cowards. Come, let us go home. The rain is cold. Chapter 9, College Trials. The next day at the Central Martial College, the midterm sparring assessments began. The entire freshman class was gathered in the main arena. Julian Silvercrest stepped onto the stage, soaking in the applause. He had officially broken through to the late apprentice realm that morning. He looked down at the roster and smirked. Instructor, I request Surya as my opponent, Julian announced loudly. I want to test my new strength against resilient targets. Surya stepped onto the mat. The crowd jeered. But Surya was calm. He remembered the notes in his book. He remembered the new flow of chi. The match began. Julian lunged, unleashing a flurry of high-speed kicks. Last week, Surya wouldn't have been able to see them. Today, Julian looked terribly slow. Surya stepped into the guard, pivoting on his heel just as the mysterious notes had dictated. He bypassed Julian's defense entirely and drove his shoulder directly into the noble's chest. The condensed chi of the mid-apprentice realm exploded on impact. Julian was launched off his feet, flying out of the ring and crashing into the weapon racks. Silence fell over the arena. The slum rat had just one-shot the aristocratic genius. Match. Match goes to Surya, the instructor stuttered. Surya looked at his hands, his heart racing. I did it. I actually did it. Chapter 10, The Looming Storm. The humiliation of Julian Silvercrest was a match thrown into a powder keg. In the lavish penthouse of the Silvercrest family, Julian's father, a ruthless businessman and a peak blood refining martial artist, slammed his fist on a mahogany table. Not only does the father refuse to sell, but the son humiliates our bloodline in public? And the thugs we hired fled the city claiming a hidden expert guards them. The patriarch's eyes narrowed. Enough playing games. He turned to a shadowy figure standing in the corner of the room. It was a mercenary, a vicious rogue cultivator at the late Meridian Opening Realm, a man who killed for sport. Break the boy's limbs outside the college grounds tomorrow. Then burn the warehouse down, the patriarch ordered. Let's see if this hidden expert can stop you. Far away in the slums, Rudra was sitting in his rocking chair, watching Mira cook dinner. Suddenly, his mid-innate senses twitched. A sharp, localized killing intent had been directed at his bloodline from miles away. Rudra's eyes darkened, the temperature in the tiny living room dropping a few degrees. He slowly reached out and picked up an old, rusted fireplace poker leaning against the wall. Let them come, the old man thought, his gaze piercing through the tin walls of his home, looking toward the glittering towers of the wealthy district. The world has forgotten the wrath of the innate realm. It is time for a reminder. Chapter 11, The Assassin in the Rain. The torrential monsoon rains of the Bengal region showed no mercy, turning the narrow, winding streets of Sector 4 into muddy rivers. Surya walked home from the college with his hood pulled low, his mind racing. Defeating Julian had felt intoxicating, but the rational part of his brain warned him of the consequences. The Silvercrest family was not known for their forgiveness. As Surya turned the corner into a deserted alleyway lined with rusted dumpsters, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. The rain seemed to slice sideways, disturbed by something moving too fast for the eye to track. A man dropped from the fire escape above, landing without a single splash. He wore a featureless black mask and a lightweight combat suit. The air around him distorted, radiating a terrifying, suffocating heat that evaporated the rain before it could touch his skin. Surya couldn't breathe. His legs felt like lead. This wasn't Julian. This wasn't a spoiled noble playing with martial arts. The sheer pressure radiating from the assassin was insurmountable. Late Meridian Opening Realm. To a mid-apprentice like Surya, the man might as well have been a god. Nothing personal, kid, the mercenary rasped, his voice devoid of emotion. He drew a serrated curved dagger. Just business. The assassin lunged. He didn't use a flashy technique, just a straight, brutal thrust aimed at Surya's collarbone, intended to sever the nerves and permanently paralyze his right arm. Surya tried to raise his guard, to use the modified iron form, but he was too slow. The dagger was a blur of silver. Chapter 12, A Poker and a Prayer. A mile away, sitting on his covered balcony, Rudra exhaled. His eyes, glowing with a faint, terrible light, were fixed on the distant alleyway. He held the rusted iron fireplace poker in his right hand. To target a child, Rudra murmured, his voice laced with the cold authority of the mid-innate realm. Silvercrest, you have crossed the line. He didn't throw the poker like a javelin. Instead, he channeled his pure, unadulterated innate chi into the rusted metal. The iron groaned, turning red hot, then glowing with a brilliant, blinding white light as it was encased in pure sword light. Rudra flicked his wrist. The poker vanished. It didn't fly through the air, it tore through it, creating a miniature sonic boom that was swallowed by a crack of thunder in the storm above. Back in the alley, the mercenary's dagger was an inch from Surya's flesh. Suddenly, the assassin's eyes widened in absolute, paralyzing terror. His survival instincts, honed over years of bloodshed, screamed at him, but his body couldn't react in time. Shlug! A beam of blinding white light punched through the brick wall of the alley, pierced directly through the mercenary's right shoulder, and pinned him violently to the dumpster behind him. The force of the impact shattered the man's collarbone and instantly ruptured his internal meridians, crippling his cultivation in a fraction of a second. The assassin screamed, dropping his dagger, his eyes rolling back in his head from the sheer shock and agony. The glowing white light faded, revealing a rusted, utterly mundane fireplace poker. Surya collapsed backward into the mud, gasping for air. He stared at the groaning, paralyzed assassin, and then at the rusted iron rod. What just happened? He looked up at the stormy sky, trembling. Had the heavens themselves struck the man down? Chapter 13, Embers of the Silvercrest. The next morning, the underworld of the city was in an uproar. A late Meridian opening mercenary had been found pinned to a dumpster in the slums, his cultivation entirely abolished by a single, imprecise strike from a blunt iron rod. In the Silvercrest penthouse, the patriarch's face was pale. The glass of imported whiskey in his hand trembled. An innate master, the patriarch whispered, the color draining from his face. Only an innate master can project chi outside the body with such terrifying force. There is a monster protecting that family. The realization terrified him. In the normal world, businessmen and politicians ruled. But in the true martial world, an innate master could walk into his corporate headquarters, slaughter his entire board of directors, and walk out before the police even arrived. The Silvercrest family immediately ceased all operations against Vivon's logistics company, pulling their thugs off the streets in absolute panic. At home, Surya was eating his breakfast in a daze. He had survived, but the encounter had shattered his worldview. He realized that the Central Martial College was just a sandbox for children. The true martial world was infinitely more dangerous, and his mid-apprentice cultivation was less than an insect's. Dad, Surya asked suddenly, looking at Vivon. Is there anywhere else I can learn? Somewhere beyond the Central College. Vivon sighed, setting down his newspaper. You mean the Gurukuls? Chapter 14, The Hidden Gurukuls. The ancient texts call them the four great Gurukuls of Bharat, Vivon explained, his voice hushed with reverence. They are not colleges, Surya. They are hidden martial sections. They exist deep within the Himalayas, the Western Ghats, and the dense forests of central India. Normal people don't even know they exist. Rudra sat in his rocking chair, sipping his tea, listening intently. He knew them well. Decades ago, he had fought alongside a few of their disciples during the beast invasions. The teachers there are monsters, Vivon continued. Meridian opening experts are merely junior instructors. The senior elders are innate realm masters. And it is whispered that the protectors of these schools, the ancient headmasters who govern them from the shadows, are true Grand Masters. Surya's eyes widened. A Grand Master. A being capable of projecting a martial aura that could crush an army. Every 3 years, the closest one to us, the Vidyapith of the Eastern Ghats, holds a public entrance exam. Vivon said, looking at his son with concern. But Surya, the students who apply there are monsters. They are the hidden heirs of ancient clans. Most of them are already in the blood-refining realm at your age. People die in those exams. Surya clenched his fists under the table. I have to try. If I stay here, I'll never be strong enough to protect us. Rudra hid a proud smile behind his teacup. Chapter 15, The Unseen Threshold. The entrance exam for the Vidyapith was only a month away. Surya threw himself into training with a maniacal intensity. He realized he needed to squeeze every drop of potential out of the iron form manual. Every night, he would wake up to find new, cryptic notes scrawled in the margins of his book. To strike hard is human. To strike through is martial. Imagine your fist ending 3 inches behind your target. Breathe from the diaphragm, not the lungs. Surya followed the notes religiously. He didn't know who his hidden guardian was, perhaps a wandering elder, perhaps the person who threw that iron poker, but he trusted them completely. Behind the scenes, Rudra was busy. He couldn't give Surya high-tier pills, as the boy's body would explode. Instead, Rudra would sneak into the kitchen late at night and use his mid-innate chi to Purify their cheap rice and vegetables, expelling the toxic impurities and infusing the food with gentle, nourishing spiritual energy. Day by day, Surya's muscles grew leaner, denser. His skin began to take on a faint, healthy sheen. He was approaching the absolute peak of the mid-apprentice realm. Chapter 16, The Gathering of Dragons. The day of the exam arrived. The testing ground was not in the city, but at the base of the treacherous Eastern Ghats mountains, shrouded in a perpetual, unnatural mist. Surya arrived wearing his battered jacket. The moment he stepped into the clearing, the sheer weight of the auras around him made his chest tight. There were hundreds of youths here. Some wore exquisite silk robes adorned with ancient Indian motifs, others wore high-tech combat suits. Almost all of them radiated the heavy, dense vitality of the low to mid-blood refining realm. To them, an apprentice realm cultivator like Surya was a joke. Look at this beggar, a giant of a boy, standing over 6.5 feet tall with skin like bronze, scoffed. He was from the northern heavy blade clans. Did he get lost looking for the local bakery? Surya ignored him, his eyes fixed on the massive stone archway that marked the entrance to the Vidyapith. Standing beneath it were 3 instructors. They weren't wearing suits. They wore simple, khadi robes, but the air around them distorted with latent heat. Meridian opening peak experts, Surya realized, swallowing hard. Silence, one of the instructors barked. The sound carried a concussive force that silenced the clearing instantly. The path to the Gurukul is not for the weak. The first test is the 1000-step Vayu array. Proceed up the mountain stairs. Those who fail to reach the top by sunset will be dismissed. Chapter 17, The Weight of Gravity. The 1000-step Vayu array was an ancient formation carved into the mountain's stone stairs. As soon as Surya placed his foot on the first step, an invisible force slammed down on his shoulders. It felt as though he was suddenly carrying a 50-pound rucksack. Gravity array, muttered a silk-clad girl next to him, before she gracefully bounded up the first 10 steps, her blood-refining physique easily handling the pressure. Surya took a deep breath, aligning his posture exactly as the mysterious notes had taught him. He didn't fight the pressure, he grounded himself, letting the weight transfer through his bones and into the earth. He began to climb. By step 300, the weight had doubled. The arrogant youths who had sprinted ahead were now gasping for breath, their faces pale. Surya's cheap canvas shoes were wearing thin, but his breathing was steady. The flawless foundation Rudra had secretly built for him was showing its worth. He had the lowest cultivation level, but his chi efficiency was absolute perfection. By step 700, Surya's muscles were screaming. His vision blurred. Blood dripped from his nose as the atmospheric pressure tried to crush his internal organs. Push through, he roared in his mind. For Mom. For Dad. For Grandpa. Chapter 18, A grandfather's shadow. High above the mountain peak, hidden within the clouds, an ancient temple floated on a sheer cliff face. Inside, an old man with a beard that flowed down to his waist sat on a lotus mat. This was Elder Vashistha, a Grand Master and a protector of the Vidyapith. His eyes were closed, his spiritual sense sweeping over the mountain, observing the examinees. He noted the prodigies with mild interest. Miles away, sitting at a rundown tea stall on the highway at the base of the mountain, Rudra was sipping a cup of cheap chai. He felt the invisible, sweeping wave of the Grand Master's spiritual sense brush past him. Rudra didn't flinch. He simply shifted his internal chi, creating a void around himself. The Grand Master's sense washed over Rudra like water flowing over a smooth stone, registering him as nothing more than a frail, mundane old man enjoying his tea. The array is well maintained, Rudra thought, gazing up at the mist. But the pressure at step 900 is too blunt. It will damage Surya's meridians if he isn't careful. Rudra closed his eyes and tapped his finger lightly on the wooden table. A microscopic, invisible pulse of innate chi shot through the earth, traveling up the mountain end, subtly softening the erratic spikes of the gravity array just as Surya reached the final 100 steps. Chapter 19, The Breakthrough in the Crucible. Step 950. Surya fell to his knees. The gravity here was immense. The giant boy from the northern clans had passed out 3 steps below, foaming at the mouth. Only a dozen students, the absolute elites, had reached the top. Surya's lungs burned. His internal chi, pooled at the base of his spine, was spinning wildly, trying to protect his organs. Do not force the chi. Let it break you, so the body must rebuild itself. The words from the margins of his manual flashed in his mind. Surya stopped resisting. He let the crushing gravity compress his internal chi. It felt like swallowing a hot coal. The pressure built, denser and denser, until crack. A profound, resonant sound echoed from within his bones. The bottleneck shattered. Fresh, vibrant chi flooded his exhausted muscles, instantly wiping away the fatigue. Surya stood up, his spine straight, his eyes burning with a fierce light. Late apprentice realm. He took the final 50 steps not at a crawl, but at a steady, unyielding walking pace, crossing the threshold of the stone archway just as the sun dipped below the horizon. At the tea stall, Rudra smiled into his cup. Ding! Descendant Surya has reached late apprentice realm. Upgrading host to late innate realm. A terrifying, localized storm of spiritual energy gathered above the tea stall for a fraction of a second, before Rudra forcefully sucked it all into his danshan, suppressing the worldly phenomena. He was now a late innate master. Chapter 20, The Silent Guardian's Warning. At the top of the stairs, the lead instructor stared at Surya in absolute disbelief. You are only at the late apprentice realm, the instructor stammered. To survive the 1000-step Vayu array without a blood-refining physique was considered biologically impossible. I broke through on the stairs, sir, Surya panted, bowing respectfully. Up in the hidden temple, Grand Master Vashasthi opened his eyes, a flicker of genuine shock crossing his ancient features. A flawless foundation, the Grand Master murmured to the empty room. His cultivation is low, but his understanding of bodily mechanics is perfect. Who taught this boy? Meanwhile, back in the city, the Silvercrest Patriarch was making a desperate call, trying to hire assassins from outside the province to finish the job while Surya was away. As the Patriarch held the phone to his ear, the heavy oak doors of his penthouse office silently blew off their hinges, turning to sawdust before they even hit the floor. The Patriarch froze. There was no one in the doorway. But carved into the solid steel of his desk, as if cut by an invisible, burning sword, were 3 words: "Do not interfere." The Patriarch dropped his phone, sinking to his knees in his empty, heavily guarded penthouse, realizing that the hidden god protecting that slum boy was watching his every move. Chapter 21, The Outer Court's Dust. The Vidyapith of the Eastern Ghats was not a single building, but a sprawling complex of ancient stone pagodas, sparring arenas and meditation terraces built directly into the misty cliffs. For the handful of commoners who passed the gravity array, reality set in immediately. There were no grand dormitories for them. While the scions of wealthy martial clans were escorted to the jade pavilions, villas rich with natural chi, Surya and the other commoners were pointed toward the ash quarters. It was a series of drafty wooden shacks near the mountain's edge. Your cultivation determines your worth here, a junior instructor informed them, his eyes cold. You are outer court disciples. You will cook, clean, and maintain the grounds. In exchange, you will be allowed to attend the morning lectures and breathe the spiritual air of the mountain. Survive for a year, and you may be tested for the inner court. Surya dropped his meager belongings onto a hard wooden cot. His roommate, a stocky farm boy named Pim who had barely survived the stairs, groaned as he rubbed his bruised legs. "They treat us like servants, not students," Pim muttered. Surya looked out the small window toward the towering peaks, where the inner court disciples lived. "Then we use their air, eat their food, and grow strong enough to make them treat us like warriors," he replied quietly, opening his battered iron form manual. Chapter 22, The Chasm of Blood Refining. The next morning, Surya attended his first lecture. In the massive open-air amphitheater, the instructor, an imposing woman with a scar across her cheek, stood before a massive bronze cauldron. "Martial arts in the mortal world is merely dancing," she began, her voice carrying over the roaring mountain winds. "True cultivation begins at the blood-refining realm. At the apprentice stage, your chi is a puddle. It can enhance a punch or speed up your legs, but it exhausts quickly. Blood refining changes the vessel." To demonstrate, she drew a steel dagger and slashed it across her own forearm. There was a sickening clang, like metal striking an anvil. Not a single drop of blood fell, only a faint white line appeared on her skin. Marrow produces dense blood. Dense blood hardens the flesh. An apprentice fights with energy, a blood refiner is the weapon. Surya swallowed hard. He remembered Julian Silvercrest's punches. Julian had only been at the apprentice level. The elites sitting in the front rows of this amphitheater, some as young as 16, were already in the low blood refining realm. The gap in sheer physical durability was a terrifying mountain to climb. Chapter 23, Paranoia of the Patriarch. Miles away in the sprawling metropolis, the Silvercrest Patriarch hadn't slept in 3 days. He had moved his bed into a windowless steel vault deep beneath his corporate headquarters. The message burned into his desk, "Do not interfere," haunted his every waking moment. "An innate master," he muttered, pacing like a caged rat. "An innate master protects that logistician's family." He picked up a secure, encrypted satellite phone. He dialed a number he had sworn never to use. It connected to a shadow syndicate known as the Venom Sect, a ruthless group of rogue cultivators hidden in the southern jungles. "Patriarch Silvercrest," a raspy voice hissed through the receiver. "I need an extraction, and I need a target monitored," the Patriarch whispered, his voice trembling. "The boy, Surya, is at the Vidyapith. I cannot touch him there. But I need you to find out who stands behind his family. Name your price. I will pay anything. To investigate a hidden expert is to court death," the voice chuckled. "But for 50 million credits, we will send our shadows to observe. Nothing more." Chapter 24, The Herb Garden Secret. Back at the Gurukul, Surya was assigned his chore, tending to the spiritual herb garden on the western cliff. It was considered a punishment detail because spiritual herbs were notoriously difficult to grow. They required pure, gentle chi to be fed into their roots daily, a task that usually exhausted an outer disciple's meager chi pool in minutes. Surya knelt in the dirt, examining a wilting ironstock orchid. He placed his hands in the soil. Instead of violently shoving his chi into the earth like the other frustrated students, Surya remembered the breathing techniques from his grandfather's invisible edits. He slowed his heartbeat. He let his chi drip from his fingertips like morning dew, thin but absolutely concentrated. Because his foundation was flawless, not a single speck of energy was wasted. The wilting orchid absorbed the pure chi and immediately perked up, its leaves taking on a vibrant, metallic sheen. Over the next week, while other students collapsed from exhaustion, Surya cultivated. He realized that carefully feeding the herbs was the ultimate form of chi control training. His late apprentice chi grew denser, thicker, and more obedient with every passing day. Chapter 25, A Walk in the Clouds. It was a moonless night at the Vidyapith. The mountain was secured by a massive, ancient array designed to alert the Grand Master to any unauthorized entry by cultivators. High above, walking on the empty air as if strolling down a paved sidewalk, was Rudra. His late innate chi was so deeply compressed, so flawlessly integrated with the natural laws of the world, that the Gurukul's alarm array simply recognized him as a passing cloud. He bypassed the patrol of meridian opening instructors without them even shivering. He landed silently in the spiritual herb garden. He saw Surya's meticulous work, the neatly tended rows of rare plants. A warm, proud smile touched the old man's lips. "You work too hard, little one," Rudra whispered to the empty garden. He crouched down and pressed his palm flat against the earth. A surge of terrifying, pure innate vitality sank deep into the soil, bypassing the roots and settling into the bedrock like a warm, pulsing battery. It wouldn't mutate the plants unnaturally, but it would create a flawless environment for Surya to practice his chi control. Before leaving, Rudra left a small, unmarked wooden box buried shallowly near Surya's favorite resting tree. Then, he stepped back into the sky and vanished. Chapter 26, The Harvest and the Jackals. A month passed. The outer court harvest day arrived. Disciples were required to hand over their herbs in exchange for merit points, which could be used to buy low-level medicinal pills and better martial manuals. The quartermaster, a bored inner court disciple, gaped at Surya's basket. The ironstock orchids weren't just healthy, they were glowing with latent energy. 50 merit points, the quartermaster grunted, handing Surya a heavy pouch of wooden tokens. It was a fortune for an outer disciple. As Surya walked back to the ash quarters, 3 figures blocked his path. They wore the fine silk of the jade pavilions. The leader was a boy named Dev, a noble from the Central Plains, currently at the low blood refining realm. "Commoner," Dev sneered, his skin possessing a faint, unnatural rigidness that signified his refined blood. "I had a poor harvest. You are going to hand over those merit points? Consider it a protection fee." Surya stopped. He looked at Dev, then at the 2 lackeys. A month ago, he would have been terrified. But a month of perfect chi control had changed him. "Move," Surya said, his voice terrifyingly calm. Chapter 27, The Geometry of Combat. Dev laughed, lunging forward. He didn't use a weapon. He threw a straight punch, relying entirely on his blood-refining physique. The sheer physical force behind the blow created a vacuum in the air. If that punch connected, Surya's late apprentice bones would shatter. But Surya didn't block. He didn't even retreat. He stepped into the strike. Pivoting his hips at a bizarre, mathematically perfect angle dictated by the margin notes in his iron form manual. The heavy punch grazed his shoulder, tearing his jacket but missing his flesh. Using Dev's forward momentum against him, Surya planted his foot behind Dev's ankle. He didn't strike the boy's hardened muscles. Instead, Surya focused every ounce of his compressed late apprentice chi into his 2 index fingers and struck the soft nerve cluster directly behind Dev's knee. Thwack! Dev's leg buckled instantly, his nervous system temporarily misfiring. Surya followed up immediately, bringing his elbow down not on Dev's head, but on the boy's collarbone using the exact angle needed to bypass the muscle and hit the joint. Dev hit the dirt, gasping in shock and pain, his arm going numb. The fight lasted less than 3 seconds. The 2 lackeys froze, unable to comprehend how a late apprentice had just instantly dismantled a blood-refining cultivator. "I said," Surya repeated, adjusting his torn jacket, "move." Chapter 28, The Grand Master's gaze. Unknown to the students, a pair of eyes had been watching from the balcony of a high pagoda. Instructor Harish, a peak meridian opening expert, gripped the wooden railing in disbelief. He had expected to step in and save the outer disciple from a beating. Instead, he had witnessed a martial miracle. "That footwork, that strike," Harish muttered. "It wasn't a high-tier technique. It was the basic iron form, but executed with a level of mechanical perfection I have never seen. He bypassed the physical defense of blood refining entirely. Harish immediately turned and walked toward the highest peak of the mountain. He needed to report this to the inner court elders. Deep within the central temple, Grand Master Vashistha sat in meditation. When Harish relayed the event, the old Grand Master opened one eye. The boy with the flawless foundation, Vashistha murmured, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Do not interfere, Harish. Let him grow. A diamond is only forged under immense pressure. We will see if he is a spark, or a true wildfire. Chapter 29, The Weight of Peace. Back in the sprawling city of Sector 4. Vivaan was sitting in a lavish new office. With the Silvercrest Corporation completely paralyzed by the fear of the hidden expert, Vivaan's logistics company had expanded exponentially. They had moved out of the slums and into a comfortable, secure suburban home. Meera was no longer working double shifts at the textile mill, she was managing the company's accounts. In the backyard of their new home, Rudra sat in his rocking chair under the shade of a large banyan tree. To the outside world, he was just an old man enjoying his retirement. But a keen observer would notice something impossible. The falling leaves never quite touched Rudra's shoulders, a microscopic cushion of late innate chi deflected them smoothly. The air around him was perpetually cool, and the flowers in Meera's garden bloomed with unnatural vibrancy simply by being near his passive aura. Rudra closed his eyes, his spiritual sense stretching out like an invisible net. He felt the faint, rat-like probing of the Venom Sex spies trying to gather information on his son's company from the city outskirts. Let them look, Rudra thought, a cold, predatory smile crossing his weathered face. When they finally decide to step out of the shadows, I will make sure they never return to them. Chapter 30, The Absolute Limit of Flesh. In the Gurukul, Surya returned to the herb garden that evening to clear his head. He sat against his favorite tree, intending to meditate. As he dug his heels into the soft earth, his boot struck something hard. He dug into the dirt and pulled out a small, unmarked wooden box. Inside lay a single, dark red pill. It didn't radiate an overwhelming aura like the high-tier pills the nobles flaunted. Instead, it smelled faintly of rain and iron. It was a marrow-cleansing pill, but completely stripped of any violent impurities by Rudra's innate chi. Surya hesitated, then swallowed it. Instantly, his body felt as though it had been plunged into a furnace. The flawless chi he had cultivated over the past month acted as a perfect conductor. The pill's energy flooded his muscles, tearing down the microfibers of his apprentice flesh and forcing them to rebuild denser, tighter, stronger. Surya bit his lip until it bled to stop himself from screaming. Black, tar-like sludge seeped from his pores as the last mortal impurities were forced out of his body. His bones groaned, his heartbeat sounding like a war drum in his ears. For 4 hours, he endured the agony of total physiological reconstruction. When the morning sun finally broke over the eastern Ghats, Surya opened his eyes. He squeezed his fist. The air popped audibly within his grip. He grabbed a piece of jagged slate rock beside him and crushed it into dust with his bare hand. He had not just reached the peak apprentice realm. He had reached the absolute limit of mortal flesh. He was ready to step into the true martial world. Hundreds of miles away, Rudra's teacup rattled gently on its saucer. Ding! Descendant Surya has reached peak apprentice realm. Upgrading host to peak innate realm. Chapter 31, The Dawn of Blood. The morning after consuming the purified marrow cleansing pill, Surya did not return to the herb garden immediately. He sat by the mountain stream, staring at his reflection in the pristine water. He looked the same, but he felt entirely alien. His skin, once scarred from years of slum living and harsh training, was now smooth and unnaturally taut. When he tapped his forearm, it didn't sound like hitting flesh, it produced a dull, heavy thud, like striking tightly packed wet sand. He was at the peak apprentice realm. His body had reached the absolute maximum potential that normal human flesh could achieve. His muscles held no wasted space, and his internal chi pool was a calm, dense lake. Yet, he knew it wasn't enough. The Iron Form manual described the next stage, the blood refining realm, as a leap across a chasm. To refine the blood, one had to force the bone marrow to shed its mortal limits and produce a heavier, viscous crimson fluid infused with qi. The wealthy nobles achieved this by bathing in cauldrons of boiling medicinal beast blood. Surya had no such resources. He had only his body, the mountain, and the mysterious notes left in his manual. He opened the worn book. On the page describing the blood refining chasm, a new line of elegant handwriting had appeared in the margins. To forge steel, the blacksmith does not gently warm the iron. He beats it upon an anvil. Seek the mountain's anvil. Chapter 32, The Venoms gaze far from the spiritual mists of the Eastern Ghats. The sprawling metropolis of Sector 4 was suffocating under a blanket of humid smog. In the affluent suburban district where Vivon had relocated his family, the streets were quiet, lined with manicured lawns and private security cameras. It was a paradise compared to the slums. But high-tech cameras meant nothing to the true martial world. Crouched on the branch of a massive oak tree overlooking Vivon's property were two figures clad in dark, form-fitting camouflage. They were shadows of the Venom sect, both at the peak meridian opening realm. Their breathing was so shallow that not even a thermal scanner could easily distinguish them from the ambient heat. Target is asleep in the master bedroom, the first shadow whispered through a closed-circuit earpiece. The wife is asleep as well. Scanners show no high-energy signatures in the house. Just an old man sleeping on the ground floor. In a dark van miles away, the handler replied, Silvercrest's intelligence suggested a hidden innate master. Are you certain it's clear? The second shadow scoffed silently. Silvercrest is a corporate coward. If an innate master lived here, the residual chi would be thick enough to choke us. It's just a lucky businessman. We go in, cripple the father, and extract him for interrogation. 5 minutes. They dropped from the tree, landing on the soft grass of Mira's garden without a single sound. Chapter 33, The Mountain's Anvil. At the Vidyapith, Surya stood before the roaring dragon waterfall on the northern face of the mountain. It was a forbidden zone for outer court disciples. The water plummeted from a cliff 300 feet above, crashing into the rocky basin with the concussive force of a freight train. Even standing 30 feet away, the mist felt like tiny needles against Surya's face. The roar was deafening. Seek the mountain's anvil, the note had read. Surya understood. He stripped off his jacket and shirt, revealing a lean, heavily corded physique. He didn't have cauldrons of beast blood to forcefully mutate his marrow. He needed extreme, sustained physical trauma to trigger his body's survival instincts, forcing the marrow to evolve. He waded into the freezing basin. The current immediately tried to sweep him away, but he sank into the perfect horse stance dictated by the iron form. He stepped directly beneath the outer edge of the waterfall. Slam! The sheer weight of the falling water drove him straight to his knees. It felt as though a giant had struck him across the shoulders with a marble pillar. His skin split open, and blood instantly washed away into the frothing water. Surya grit his teeth, the veins in his neck bulging. He began to cycle his peak apprentice chi, using it not to fight the water, but to protect his internal organs from rupturing. He focused his mind on his marrow, envisioning it as iron-on. An anvil. Strike me, Surya thought, slowly, agonizingly pushing himself up from his knees. Strike me until I break, or until I become unbreakable. Chapter 34, A Drop of Crimson. For 3 days and 3 nights, Surya returned to the waterfall. During the day, he attended his chores, hiding his bruised, battered body beneath his thick jacket. At night, he stood beneath the crushing water. On the fourth night, the pain reached a crescendo. The constant, brutal pounding of the waterfall had pushed his peak apprentice physique to the brink of total collapse. His vision swam with black spots. His chi pool was bone dry. Just as his legs were about to give out completely, a profound, terrifying heat erupted from the very core of his bones. It wasn't chi. It was biological. His marrow, pushed to the absolute limit of survival by the perfect foundation Rudra had built and the extreme pressure of the water, finally mutated. Thump! His heart gave a singular, massive beat that echoed over the roar of the waterfall. A single drop of heavy, viscous, chi-infused blood was pushed out of his marrow and into his veins. It felt like a drop of liquid magma. As it traveled through his circulatory system, his exhausted muscles rapidly absorbed it, knitting together with terrifying density. Thump! 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 His heart rate accelerated, pumping this new, heavy blood throughout his body. The falling water, which had felt like crushing boulders moments ago, suddenly felt manageable. Surya stood up straight. The water pounded against his bare shoulders, but his skin no longer bruised. When the water struck his flesh, it made a faint, metallic clang. He had crossed the chasm. He had stepped into the low blood refining realm. Chapter 35, The Birth of a Grand Master. Hundreds of miles away, sitting in his pitch-black living room, Rudra's eyes snapped open. Ding! Descendant Surya has crossed the mortal chasm. Descendant has achieved low blood refining realm. The mortal paths have been transcended. Activating Tier 2, the earthly paths. Upgrading host to low Grandmaster realm. Rudra gasped. The breath he took sucked all the oxygen out of the living room, creating a momentary vacuum that rattled the windows. The pure innate chi in his danshan began to compress, folding in on itself 1,000 times over until it ignited into something entirely different. It was no longer just energy. It was martial intent. It was the fusion of mind, soul, and physical power. His body didn't just feel strong, it felt anchored to the very fabric of the world. He could feel the magnetic pull of the earth beneath his feet. If the innate realm made him an apex predator, the Grandmaster realm made him a walking natural disaster. The system suppressed the visual phenomena, preventing the sky above the city from splitting open, but Rudra felt the sheer, terrifying weight of the martial aura now resting within his soul. A Grandmaster could paralyze an army simply by getting angry. Rudra exhaled slowly, normalizing the air pressure in the room. He looked toward the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. His newfound Grandmaster senses infinitely sharper than innate perception picked up 2 microscopic disturbances on his lawn. Insects in the garden, Rudra murmured, his voice echoing with a strange, multi-layered resonance. Chapter 36, Treading on the Flowers. The 2 shadows from the Venom sect crept toward the sliding glass door of the suburban home. Their late meridian opening chi was perfectly masked. They had specialized tools designed to cut through reinforced security glass without triggering the alarms. The first shadow raised his laser cutter. "The door is unlocked," a voice drifted from the darkness inside the house. The 2 assassins froze. The voice was calm, frail, and old, yet it seemed to originate from directly inside their own skulls. The first shadow signaled his partner. They drew their poisoned daggers, their bodies coiled like springs, and stepped through the sliding door into the pitch-black living room. Sitting in a rocking chair, illuminated only by the faint moonlight filtering through the windows, was the old man. He held no weapon. He radiated no chi. "You stepped on the marigolds," Rudra said softly, not looking at them. "My daughter-in-law worked very hard on those." The second shadow sneered behind his mask. "Go to sleep, old man." He lunged forward with terrifying speed, his dagger aimed at Rudra's neck, intending to knock the old man unconscious. Chapter 37, The Weight of the Heavens. Rudra didn't dodge. He didn't raise his hand. He simply turned his head and looked at the assassin. He opened the floodgates of his soul and released a fraction, just a sliver of his low grandmaster martial aura. There was no flash of light. No shock wave. Instead, gravity in the living room simply ceased to obey the laws of physics. The air instantly solidified into the consistency of deep ocean pressure. The lunging assassin stopped mid-air as if he had hit an invisible titanium wall. His eyes bulged, blood instantly rupturing the blood vessels in his sclera. The sheer psychic and physical weight of the aura slammed down on both shadows. Crack! Both peak. Meridian opening experts, men who could slaughter platoons of armed soldiers, were driven to their knees. The wooden floorboards beneath them splintered and groaned under the unnatural gravity. Aura! The first shadow choked out, blood pouring from his nose and ears, his internal organs threatening to burst. Grandmaster. The horror in his mind eclipsed the physical pain. A grandmaster was a myth in the secular world. They were figures who sat atop mountains, governing nations from the shadows. Why was one sitting in a rocking chair in the suburbs? The Silvercrest boy was arrogant, Rudra said, his voice quiet, heavy, and utterly devoid of mercy. But the Venom sect are murderers. You do not belong in my son's home. Rudra blinked. The pressure intensified tenfold for a microsecond. The two assassins collapsed completely flat against the floor, their meridians shattering instantly, their consciousness snuffed out before they could even scream. Rudra stood up, seamlessly hiding his aura once more. He picked up the two unconscious, crippled men by their collars with one hand, walking out into the night to dispose of the trash. Chapter 38, The Outer Court Tournament. The sun rose over the Vidyapith of the Eastern Ghats, bringing with it a palpable tension. Today was the biannual Outer Court Promotion Tournament. Thousands of disciples gathered around the grand stone arenas carved into the mountainside. The prize was everything an outer disciple dreamed of: entry into the inner court, access to the true martial arts libraries, and high-tier medicinal pills. Surya stood in the registration line. He wore his standard grey uniform, but the sleeves were tight around his newly dense muscles. Beside him, his roommate Pim looked nervous. I heard the inner court instructors are watching, Pim said, adjusting his bracers. Even some of the Jade Pavilion nobles are participating, just to secure higher rankings. Surya looked toward the raised pavilion where the instructors sat. He spotted Instructor Harish, who was looking back at him with an unreadable expression. The matches began in a flurry of violence. The outer court disciples fought with desperate ferocity, but the disparity in resources was clear. Pim was eliminated in the second round by a noble using a high-tier win technique. Match 42, the referee's magically amplified voice rang out. Surya of Sector 4 vs Kalen of the Iron Blood Clan. Chapter 39, The Roar of the Flesh. Surya stepped into the ring. The stone floor was scarred from previous battles. His opponent, Kalen, stepped up. He was a towering youth wearing a sleeveless silk tunic, wielding a heavy, blunt-edged practice halberd. Kalen radiated the heavy, suffocating vitality of the mid-blood refining realm. A slum rat made it this far. Kalen laughed, spinning the heavy halberd with one hand. I heard you beat Dev. He was a disgrace to the nobles. Let me show you what real martial lineage looks like. Begin, the referee shouted. Kalen didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, his blood-refining muscles propelling him at incredible speed. He swung the halberd in a massive, sweeping arc aimed directly at Surya's ribs. The sheer physical force behind the weapon tore the air, creating a whistling sound. The crowd held its breath. An apprentice realm body would be cut in half by the sheer blunt force of that strike. Surya didn't use the flawless footwork to dodge. He didn't retreat. He simply planted his feet and raised his bare left arm to block. Clang! The sound echoed through the arena like a church bell ringing. The heavy steel shaft of the halberd struck Surya's forearm directly. The crowd expected bone to shatter. Instead, Kalen's eyes widened in shock as the force vibrated back up the halberd, numbing his own hands. Surya's arm hadn't moved an inch. His skin wasn't even bruised. You! Kalen stammered, staring at the perfectly intact flesh of the commoner. Blood refining? When did you? You rely too much on the weapon, Surya said calmly. Before Kalen could pull the halberd back, Surya stepped into the guard. He didn't use chi. He simply twisted his waist and delivered a standard, textbook punch from the Iron Form manual directly to Kalen's armored chest. But with the terrifying density of Surya's perfectly refined blood, the punch carried the force of a cannonball. Kalen's silk armor shattered. The giant boy was lifted off his feet, flying backward 10 yards before crashing violently out of the arena. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. Chapter 40, The Grand Master's gaze. Silence blanketed the arena. Thousands of disciples stared in absolute disbelief. A commoner, using the most basic, fundamentally plain martial arts punch, had just physically overpowered a mid-blood refining noble with a single blow. Up in the viewing pavilion, Instructor Harish stood up, knocking his chair backward. He didn't just break through, Harish whispered, his eyes wide. His flesh. The density of his blood, it's thicker than disciples in the late blood refining realm. He forged a perfect vessel. Deep within the central temple, Grand Master Vashistha sat meditating. A faint smile finally cracked his ancient, weathered face. A flawless mortal foundation, the Grand Master rumbled. The boy has suffered beautifully. Vashistha raised his hand and flicked his finger. A tiny golden token materialized from thin air and shot out of the temple window, flying across the mountain like a shooting star. Down in the arena, as the referee shakily declared Surya the winner, a streak of golden light descended from the sky. It hovered right in front of Surya's face. It was a jade token, glowing with an ancient, terrifying aura. The entire arena erupted in gasps, several instructors immediately dropping to their knees. The Grand Master's token! Harish gasped out loud. Surya reached out and took the token. It was warm to the touch. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing, he had finally forced the hidden world to look at him. Far away, Rudra sipped his tea, looking up at the sky. Good boy, the Grand Master thought. Now, the real training begins. Chapter 41, The Weight of Gold. The golden jade token hovered in front of Surya, emitting a faint, thrumming hum that vibrated in the chest of every cultivator present. To the thousands of outer court disciples, it was a pretty trinket. But to the inner court nobles and the instructors, it was the weight of the heavens. Instructor Harish was the first to react. He leaped from the high pavilion, landing in the arena with a heavy thud that cracked the stone. He didn't look at Kalen, who was groaning in the dirt. He bowed deeply toward the central peak, then turned to Surya. Take it, Surya, Harish said, his voice stripped of its usual harshness. That is the Grand Master's decree. The tournament is over for you. Surya tentatively reached out and grasped the token. It felt warm, carved with intricate, flowing clouds and a single character, Vidyapith. What does it mean, instructor? Surya asked respectfully. It means you are no longer an outer court disciple, Harish replied, gesturing toward the towering peaks hidden in the mist. You have bypassed the inner court trials entirely. You are summoned to the high pavilion. Grand Master Vashistha wishes to see you. A collective gasp swept through the arena. The nobles from the jade pavilions looked as though they had swallowed poison. A commoner, a boy from the slums of Sector 4, had just been granted an audience with the protector of the Eastern Ghats. Surya looked back toward the crowd. He met Pim's eyes. His stocky roommate gave him a wide, bruised grin and a thumbs up. Surya nodded back, clutching the token. His journey into the true martial world had finally begun. Chapter 42, The High Pavilion. The path to the High Pavilion was not a physical staircase, but a bridge of condensed, solid mist that bridged the gap between the lower peaks and the central mountain. Surya walked across it, his newly forged low-blood refining body easily adapting to the thinning air and the crushing spiritual pressure of the peak. He arrived at a modest, ancient wooden temple. There were no golden statues or opulent banners. Just the smell of burning sandalwood and the overwhelming sensation of an ancient predator sleeping within. "Enter," a voice rumbled, seemingly originating from the wood of the temple itself. Surya stepped inside and bowed perfectly. Sitting on a simple straw mat was Grand Master Vashistha. The old man's beard flowed down to his lap, and his eyes held the depth of a bottomless ocean. "Step forward, boy," Vashistha commanded. Surya obeyed. The Grand Master reached out a frail-looking hand and clamped his fingers around Surya's wrist. For a split second, a terrifying, probing chi shot into Surya's meridians. It was not meant to harm, but to inspect. Vashistha's ancient eyes widened slightly. He let go of Surya's wrist as if it burned. "No residual pill toxins," the Grand Master murmured to himself, genuine shock bleeding into his voice. "No forced meridian expansions. Your blood, it is as dense as mercury, yet flows like water. A flawless mortal foundation. Tell me, child, who forged this vessel?" Surya looked at the floor. "I forged it myself, elder. Using the iron form manual and the roaring dragon waterfall." Vashistha stroked his beard, his eyes narrowing. He knew there was a piece missing a common manual could not produce such perfection. But he also recognized the fierce independence in the boy's eyes. "Very well," Vashistha said. "You have earned your place. The iron form has served its purpose, but it can take you no further. You are an inner court disciple now." Chapter 43, A New Manual, A New Flaw. Vashistha waved his hand. A thick, leather-bound book materialized from a spatial ring on his finger and floated gently into Surya's hands. "This is the River Mountain Meridian Art," the Grand Master explained. "It is an earth-tier cultivation manual. It will guide you through the blood refining and meridian opening realms. Go to the inner court pavilions. Train well. I will be watching your progress." Surya bowed so deeply his forehead almost touched the floor. "Thank you, Grand Master." When Surya was escorted to his new quarters, a beautiful, single-occupancy wooden villa on a cliffside overlooking a sea of clouds, he immediately sat on the meditation mat and opened the Earth-tier manual. It was infinitely more complex than the iron form. It described how to use Qi to crystallize the blood, increasing its density further to reach the mid-blood refining realm. Eagerly, Surya began to cycle his energy according to the first chapter. But almost immediately, something felt wrong. His body, perfected and spoiled by the flawless, invisible edits of his grandfather, suddenly hit friction. The Qi path dictated by the River Mountain Art felt slightly jagged. It was powerful, yes, but it wasn't perfect. It felt like forcing a square peg into a slightly rounded hole. His flawless foundation was actually rejecting the slight impurities of the earth-tier technique. Exhausted and frustrated, Surya closed the book, deciding to sleep and try again at dawn. Chapter 44, The Midnight Edits. Hundreds of miles away, in the quiet suburbs of Sector 4, Rudra was watering Mira's marigolds under the moonlight. System alert, Descendant Surya has acquired an Earth-tier manual, River Mountain Meridian Art. Detecting flaws in the manual. 412 inefficiencies found. Reward generated, the flawless Heaven-tier primordial River Mountain Art. Rudra paused, the watering can hovering perfectly still. The system flooded his brain with the perfect version of the technique. It was a manual fit for a young emperor, completely devoid of bottlenecks. The boy needs his study materials, Rudra chuckled softly. He placed the watering can down. He didn't take a tram. He didn't use a vehicle. Rudra stepped forward, and his low Grandmaster aura seamlessly integrated with the magnetic fields of the earth. Space seemed to fold around him. In a single, casual stride, he crossed 50 miles. Another stride, another 50 miles. To the mortal eye, he was a ghost blurring through the night. In less than 10 minutes, Rudra stood on the misty peaks of the Vidyapith. The Grandmaster's defensive arrays washed over him, completely failing to register the presence of a cultivator whose understanding of natural laws far exceeded the arrays. Creator. Rudra slipped into Surya's villa. He looked affectionately at his sleeping grandson. He picked up the leather-bound manual, pulled out a pen, and went to work. He crossed out entire paragraphs, redrawing the chi diagrams with impossible geometric perfection. Before leaving, Rudra pulled a small, wax paper-wrapped bundle from his pocket. A fresh, sweet laddu Mira had made that evening and placed it perfectly on top of the newly edited book. Chapter 45, The Venom's Paranoia. While the Vidyapith slept in peace, the deep jungles of the south were awake with panic. Hidden in a subterranean cavern was the headquarters of the Venom sect. The sect leader, a horrifyingly scarred man at the half-step Grandmaster realm, sat on a throne of bone. He was staring at a shattered soulgate on the table before him. Explain, the sect leader hissed, the ambient temperature in the cavern dropping below freezing. The handler, trembling violently, bowed his head to the dirt. My lord, the two-peak meridian opening. Shadows we sent to Sector 4. Their soulgates shattered simultaneously. There was no distress signal. No sounds of combat. They simply ceased to exist. The sect leader's eyes narrowed. To kill two peak meridian opening experts instantly and silently required a terrifying disparity in power. The Silvercrest Patriarch mentioned a hidden expert, the sect leader murmured, drumming his fingers. I assumed it was a rogue meridian expert. But this reeks of a Grandmaster's martial domain. Only a Grandmaster can crush two experts with mere pressure. The handler shivered. Should we retaliate, my lord? Fool! The sect leader roared, backhanding the air. A wave of force sent the handler crashing into the cavern wall. You do not provoke a Grandmaster. Cut all ties with the Silvercrest family. Erase all records of our contract. If that monster traces the shadows back to us, he could level this entire mountain. Chapter 46, The Taste of Home. The morning sun filtered through the paper screens of Surya's villa. He woke up, stretching his dense muscles, and immediately looked toward his desk. He froze. Sitting on top of his manual was a sweet laddu wrapped in familiar wax paper. Surya's heart hammered in his chest. He rushed to the desk, looking around wildly. He recognized that wax paper. It was the exact brand his mother bought from the corner store in Sector 4. And the manual beneath it, the pages were filled with elegant, familiar handwriting. The river does not fight the mountain, it wears it down through patience. Do not force the chi through the heart meridian. Let it pool in the lungs first. Surya sat down heavily, tears pricking the corners of his eyes. He wasn't alone. His hidden guardian wasn't just some random wandering elder taking pity on him. It was someone intimately connected to his family. Someone watching over them. He took a bite of the sweet laddu, tasting the familiar warmth of home. Then, with renewed, burning determination, he sat in a lotus position and began to cultivate the edited primordial river mountain art. This time, there was no friction. The chi flowed like liquid gold, perfectly synchronizing with his heavy, blood-refining physique. Chapter 47, The Jealous Heirs. A week passed in the inner court. The resources here were staggering. Surya had access to spirit chambers, rooms built over natural chi vents in the mountain. But his rapid ascension had not gone unnoticed. The inner court was ruled by a hierarchy of noble clans. To them, a commoner skipping the trials and receiving the Grand Master's token was an unforgivable insult. One afternoon, as Surya walked out of the spirit chamber, his path was blocked by three youths. They wore the golden trim of the inner court elite. The leader was an aristocrat named Aryan, currently at the late blood refining realm. Surya, isn't it? Aryan smiled, though his eyes were cold and reptilian. You've been hiding in the spirit chambers all week. As your seniors, we feel it's our duty to help the Grand Master's chosen one test his physical limits. I am not interested in sparring, Surya said calmly, trying to step around them. Oh, it's not a spar, Aryan chuckled, stepping into his path. It's an endurance test. We are heading to the Gravity Pagoda. If you refuse, the entire inner court will know the Grand Master gave his token to a coward who hides behind his title. Surya stopped. He knew how the aristocratic mind worked. If he backed down now, they would hound him endlessly, disrupting his cultivation. Fine, Surya said, his voice flat. Lead the way. Chapter 48, The Gravity Pagoda. The Gravity Pagoda was a massive, five-story iron structure designed to compress the body and force the blood to refine faster. The higher the floor, the deadlier the pressure. Aryan led Surya straight to the third floor, a level typically reserved for peak blood refining experts. The moment the heavy iron doors sealed behind them, the array activated. Boom! The gravity here was 10 times that of the mortal world. The air itself felt like a solid block of lead. Aryan and his two lackeys immediately dropped into deep stances, their faces flushing red as they frantically cycled their chi to keep their organs from rupturing. They had taken expensive gravity-resisting pills before entering, yet they were still sweating bullets. Aryan looked over, expecting to see the commoner crushed against the floor, begging for mercy. Instead, Aryan's jaw dropped. Surya was standing perfectly upright. His low blood refining physique, forged under the roaring dragon waterfall and perfected by a heaven-tier manual, was fundamentally superior to their pill-stuffed bodies. Surya didn't look strained. He looked completely at peace. He slowly walked to the center of the room, sat down in a flawless lotus position, and closed his eyes to meditate. How? Aryan choked out, the gravity pressing on his chest like an anvil. He's only low blood refining. For 2 hours, Surya meditated, utilizing the immense pressure to forcefully compress his blood even further. Aryan and his lackeys, too proud to leave before the commoner, were forced to endure it. By the end of the second hour, all three nobles collapsed, foaming at the mouth, completely defeated by their own trap. Chapter 49, The Patriarch's Despair. While Surya was breaking aristocratic egos, the Silvercrest Patriarch was breaking under sheer terror. Having lost contact with the Venom sect, the Patriarch realized his invisible enemy had likely annihilated the assassins. Paranoia consumed him. He liquidated millions in company assets, packed a briefcase of bearer bonds, and fled to his private airstrip on the outskirts of Sector 4. The jet engines were whining, preparing for takeoff to a non-extradition country. The Patriarch sprinted across the tarmac, clutching his briefcase. But as he neared the stairs of his private jet, the whining of the engines suddenly stopped. The Patriarch froze. He looked up. The massive, spinning turbine blades of the jet engine were perfectly still. The wind had stopped. The ambient noise of the city had vanished. It was as if the world had been put on pause. Standing at the base of the plane's stairs, hands clasped behind his back, was Rudra. Going somewhere, Julian's father? Rudra asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it echoed inside the patriarch's skull like a tolling bell. You! The patriarch fell to his knees, dropping the briefcase. The Grand Master aura radiating from the old man wasn't crushing him. Physically, it was crushing his mind, eroding his sanity. You tried to take my son's livelihood, Rudra said softly, walking slowly toward the trembling billionaire. You sent assassins to cripple my grandson. You hired the Venom sect to invade my home. Please! The patriarch screamed, tears streaming down his face. Take the money. Take the company. Spare my life. I do not want your money, Rudra said, stopping right in front of the man. He placed a single, glowing finger against the patriarch's forehead. But I will take your martial foundation. And your memories of my bloodline. A burst of localized, precise chi shot into the patriarch's brain. In an instant, the man's cultivation was permanently shattered. His memories of the past 6 months of Vivaan, Surya, and the hidden expert were surgically erased. Rudra turned and walked away, disappearing into the night, leaving a babbling, mortal amnesiac sitting on the tarmac. Chapter 50, The Mid-Blood Refining Breakthrough. Back in the Gravity Pagoda, Surya opened his eyes. The terrifying pressure of the third floor had pushed his low blood refining physique to its absolute limit. The primordial river mountain art circulated the dense chi through his body with mechanical perfection. He felt the heavy, viscous blood within his veins thicken even further, crystallizing into a fluid that held the density of liquid iron. A profound, echoing resonance rang out from his bones. The air around Surya snapped, a visible shockwave of pure physical force radiating outward, blowing the unconscious bodies of the nobles against the iron walls. He had broken through. He was now at the mid-blood refining realm. Surya stood up. He felt a sense of boundless, unyielding strength. If he punched the Kalan from the outer court tournament right now, he wouldn't just break the boy's halberd, he would shatter it into dust. Hundreds of miles away, walking down a quiet suburban street, Rudra smiled as the familiar chime echoed in his mind. Ding! Descendant Surya has reached the mid-blood refining realm. Upgrading host to mid-Grand Master realm. Rudra exhaled. The streetlights around him flickered and dimmed for a moment as the world struggled to contain the terrifying influx of power now housed within the old man's body. Keep climbing, Surya, Rudra thought, looking up at the stars. The sky is vast, and we have only just begun to touch it. Chapter 51, The Weightless World. The heavy iron doors of the Gravity Pagoda ground open, groaning against the stone floor. Surya stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The first thing he noticed was the profound sense of weightlessness. After enduring the crushing pressure of the third floor and breaking through to the mid-blood refining realm, the normal atmospheric gravity of the Vidyapith felt like walking on the moon. He took a step, and to his surprise, his foot landed completely silently. His muscles had become so incredibly dense and his chi control so perfect that he unconsciously absorbed the impact of his own footfalls. His cheap grey uniform, damp with sweat, felt as flimsy as tissue paper against his newly hardened flesh. Behind him, the groans of the 3 unconscious nobles echoed from the dark room. Instructor Harish, who had been patrolling the pagoda grounds, rushed forward. His eyes darted from the pristine, completely unharmed Surya to the 3 aristocratic youths collapsed on the floor, bleeding from their noses. Did they attack you? Harish demanded, his hand resting on the hilt of his wooden practice sword. No, Instructor, Surya replied, his voice calm, carrying a new, deep resonance. They invited me to an endurance test. It seems they forgot to monitor their own limits. Harish stared at the commoner. He could sense the terrifying, suppressed vitality radiating from Surya's pores. The boy smelled faintly of ozone and raw iron, the unmistakable scent of a fresh blood refining breakthrough. He broke through under the pressure of the third floor, Harish realized, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. While the nobles crumbled, he used their trap as an anvil. Go back to your villa, Surya, Harish sighed, rubbing his temples. I will have these fools sent to the medical pavilion. And congratulations on your breakthrough. Surya bowed respectfully and walked away, his silent footsteps leaving Harish staring after him in awe. Chapter 52, A quiet morning in Sector 4. The morning sun cast long, golden shadows across the neatly trimmed lawn of Vivon's suburban home. The air smelled of dew and Mira's blooming marigolds. Sitting on the back porch, Rudra held a ceramic teacup. He didn't have a kettle. He simply held the cup, and his mid-grandmaster chi commanded the ambient kinetic energy in the water to accelerate. Within 3 seconds, the water boiled perfectly without a single flame. He dropped in a pinch of tea leaves, sighing as the rich aroma filled the air. Dad, the newspaper is here, Vivon called out, stepping onto the porch. Adjusting his tie before heading to his logistics office. You won't believe the headlines. Rudra took a sip of his tea. Oh? Did the local sports team win? No, it's Julian Silvercrest's father, Vivon said, shaking his head in disbelief. The CEO of Silvercrest Corporation. He was found wandering his private airstrip last night, completely delirious. The doctors say he suffered a massive, sudden stroke. He's lost all his memories of the past year and stepped down from the company. Their stock is plummeting. Is that so? Rudra murmured, his expression a picture of mild, elderly surprise. Life is unpredictable, Vivon. Health is a fragile thing. We must be grateful for our peace. Absolutely, Vivon smiled, kissing his father's forehead. Have a good day, Dad. I'll be home late. As Vivon's car pulled out of the driveway, Rudra's gentle smile slowly faded. He looked down at a tiny, microscopic black beetle crawling on the wooden porch. With a thought, a fraction of a millimeter of space around the beetle folded inward. The insect vanished, instantly teleported to a forest 50 miles away. The Grandmaster realm was not just about brute force, it was about beginning to dictate the rules of reality itself. The Silvercrest threat is neutralized, Rudra thought. But the venomous snakes in the south are still terrified. Good. Let them stay in the dark. Chapter 53, The Dust of the Ancients. Back at the Vidyapith, Surya decided it was time to find a weapon. His fists were deadly, but against cultivators wielding enchanted steel, he needed an equalizer. The inner court-martial library was a massive, ancient pagoda carved directly out of the mountain's core. The air inside was cool, dry, and smelled intensely of aged cedarwood and old parchment. Thousands of jade slips and leather-bound tomes lined the towering shelves. Sitting by the entrance was the library elder, a man so thin and old he looked like a mummified corpse. He didn't even open his eyes as Surya approached. Grandmaster's token bearer, the elder wheezed, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping across stone. First floor is mortal tier. Second floor is earth tier. You may choose one manual. Do not bite off more than you can chew, boy. Thank you, elder, Surya bowed. He bypassed the first floor entirely and walked up the spiraling wooden stairs. The second floor was dimly lit by glowing moss. Here, the manuals were fewer, protected by faint, shimmering chi barriers. Surya browsed for hours. He ignored the flashy, high-speed rapier techniques favored by the nobles. His mid-blood refining physique was heavy, dense, and built for overwhelming force. Finally, in a dusty, neglected corner, he found a thick, iron-bound book. The Mountain Cleaver Broadsword Art. It was an earth-tier manual that focused on absolute, brutal downward force, relying on the user's physical weight and blood density rather than complex footwork. Surya reached out, pushing his chi through the barrier, and claimed the book. Chapter 54, The Friction of the Blade. Surya spent the last of his merit points at the quartermaster to purchase a standard, heavy iron broadsword. It weighed nearly 40 pounds, a blade that would exhaust an apprentice in minutes, but felt comfortably hefty in Surya's newly forged hands. He retreated to the secluded bamboo grove behind his villa to practice. The mountain cleaver art required the cultivator to draw chi from the earth, pull it in the shoulders, and drive it down through the blade. Surya planted his feet, gripped the hilt with both hands, and cycled his energy. He swung the sword. Swish! The blade cut the air, severing a falling bamboo leaf in half, but the resulting force sent a jarring, painful shockwave back up Surya's arms. He winced, dropping to one knee. Ah! Surya grunted, rubbing his right shoulder. The technique was flawed. Or rather, it wasn't suited for a perfectly forged vessel. The manual instructed the user to forcefully expand their meridians during the swing to accommodate the sudden burst of chi. But Surya's meridians, refined to perfection by Rudra's heaven-tier methods, were already perfectly aligned. Forcing them to expand unnaturally caused violent friction in his chi flow. For 3 hours, Surya tried to adapt, but every swing resulted in painful muscle cramps and a metallic tang of blood in his throat. Exhausted, he left the heavy sword planted in the dirt and dragged himself inside to sleep, leaving the manual on his desk. Chapter 55, The Ghost in the Pages. Midnight draped the Vidyapith in a thick, silvery mist. In the suburbs, Rudra was sitting in his dark living room, his eyes closed. System alert, Descendant Surya has acquired an Earth-tier manual. Mountain Cleaver Broadsword Art. Detecting flaws in the manual. 218 structural inefficiencies found. Reward generated, the flawless heaven-tier heaven-cleaving starfall. Art. Rudra opened his eyes. The shadows in the room seemed to bow to him. He stepped forward. This time, he didn't just walk fast. He utilized a sliver of mid-grandmaster spatial law. He took a step in his living room, and his foot landed softly on the wooden floorboards of Surya's villa, 300 miles away. The transition was perfectly silent. Not a single blade of grass on the mountain stirred. The massive, ancient defensive arrays of the Gurukul, designed to detect even a mouse's chi, completely ignored the old man standing in the room. To the array, Rudra was simply empty space. Rudra looked at his sleeping grandson. He saw the faint bruising on Surya's shoulders from the flawed sword swings. A flicker of cold anger toward the creators of such primitive manuals crossed the Grandmaster's eyes. He walked to the desk, pulled out his pen, and opened the Mountain Cleaver manual. Rudra's pen moved with terrifying elegance. He didn't just cross out words, he redrew the entire anatomical diagrams. He changed the stance from a rigid earth root to a fluid, falling star posture. He eliminated the need to expand the meridians, instead teaching the chi to spiral like a drill before entering the blade. When he finished, Rudra pulled a small, mundane steel thermos from his pocket. Inside was water Mira had boiled that evening, which Rudra had infused with a microscopic drop of pure Grandmaster vitality. He placed the thermos on the desk next to the manual, patted Surya's head gently, and stepped back into the void. Chapter 56, The Resonance of Iron. When Surya woke the next morning, his shoulders still ached dully. He stretched, walking over to his desk to retrieve his manual. He froze. Sitting perfectly centered on the book was a dented steel thermos. It was the exact thermos he used to take to his part-time delivery job back in Sector 4. Surya's breath caught in his throat. With trembling hands, he unscrewed the cap and took a sip. The water was crisp, cool, and tasted faintly of the clay pots Mira kept in their kitchen. The moment the liquid hit his stomach, a wave of gentle, soothing warmth flooded his exhausted muscles, instantly erasing the bruises on his shoulders. He looked down at the manual. The pages were covered in the familiar, elegant handwriting. Do not fight the earth to gain its strength. The earth is already beneath you. Let the blade fall like a dying star. Spiral the chi, do not force it. Surya grabbed the book and the thermos and rushed out to the bamboo grove. He grabbed the heavy iron broadsword from the dirt. He read the newly drawn diagrams. He adjusted his stance, softening his knees, abandoning the rigid posture of the original manual. He drew his chi, but instead of forcing his meridians wide, he visualized the energy spiraling like a vortex down his arms. He swung the blade. Vroom! There was no jarring shockwave. There was no friction. The heavy iron broadsword cut through the air so smoothly that it created a localized vacuum. A crescent of compressed air, sharp as a razor, shot from the blade and cleanly sliced through a 6-inch thick bamboo stalk 10 feet away. Surya stood in stunned silence. The blade hummed in his hands, perfectly resonant with his heartbeat. The heaven-cleaving starfall art had been born. Chapter 57, Whispers in the Venom Sect. Far to the south, deep in the subterranean caverns of the Venom Sect, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The sect leader, his scarred face illuminated by the eerie glow of green spirit torches, sat on his bone throne. He had sworn off Sector 4, terrified of the hidden Grand Master. But a sect could not survive on fear alone. He needed to know if this hidden monster was tied to the orthodox factions. Handler, the sect leader hissed. Have you found any anomalies? The handler bowed deeply, unrolling a parchment. My lord, we dare not scry Sector 4 directly. But we have been monitoring the regional gurukuls. There is a strange rumor emerging from the Vidyapith of the Eastern Ghats. Speak. A commoner. Boy. An outer disciple who achieved the blood-refining realm with impossible speed. He defeated a mid-blood refining noble with a single, basic punch and was granted the Grand Master's token. His name is Surya. He is from Sector 4. The sect leader's eyes widened, the green flames around the room flickering wildly. A flawless vessel, the sect leader murmured, piecing the puzzle together. A Grand Master is not just protecting that family. He is forging an heir. If that boy grows, he will inherit the monster's power. Should we strike the boy at the Gurukul? The handler asked nervously. Idiot! The Vidyapith is protected by Vashistha. The sect leader snarled. But Vashistha cannot protect the boy when he leaves the mountain. Send an initiate. A faceless disciple. Have them enroll in the Vidyapitha's outer court. Do not attack. Just watch the boy. Find his weakness. Chapter 58, The Mission Board at the Vidyapith, the cost of living in. The inner court was high. The spirit chambers and high-tier beast meat in the dining halls required merit points. With his initial stipend running low, Surya had to earn his keep. He walked into the mission hall, a grand, bustling building filled with the scent of melting wax and dried ink. Dozens of inner court disciples clustered around a massive wooden board covered in parchment scrolls. The bureaucracy of the martial world was mundane but efficient. Minor elders sat behind long wooden desks, stamping scrolls with wax seals, calculating merit points for returned beast cores and rare herbs. Surya bypassed the high-tier assassination and escort missions. He needed a mission that would allow him to test his newly edited Starfall art on a living target without drawing too much attention. He pulled a dusty scroll from the lower corner of the board. Target, Ironhide Boar. Location, the mist valleys below the Vidyapith. Cultivation level, low to mid-blood refining beast. Reward, 150 merit points for the intact hide and beast core. It was a standard hunting mission, usually taken by groups of 3 low-blood refining disciples due to the boar's incredibly thick armor. Surya rolled up the scroll, took it to the clerk, and received a wax stamp of approval. He strapped the heavy iron broadsword to his back and headed toward the winding trails that led down into the mist. Chapter 59, Descent into the Mist. The mist valleys were a primordial jungle, nestled at the base of the eastern Ghats. The sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy, casting the forest floor in perpetual twilight. The air was damp, smelling of rotting leaves and wild musk. Surya moved silently. His mid-blood refining body allowed him to control his breathing perfectly, blending his thermal signature with the ambient temperature of the jungle. He didn't use chi to search, he used his senses. He noticed the minor details the nobles often missed. A snapped fern stalk oozing fresh sap. The faint indentations of split hooves in the damp mud. A patch of rough bark rubbed smooth on a massive oak tree. He tracked the beast for 2 hours, moving deeper into the valley. Suddenly, the smell of musk grew overpowering. Surya ducked behind a moss-covered boulder. In a clearing ahead, uprooting spiritual tubers with its massive tusks, was the iron-hide boar. It was the size of a small van. Its skin was covered in thick, hardened plates of calcified mud and dense muscle, giving it a dull, metallic sheen. It radiated the savage, chaotic chi of a mid-blood refining beast. Surya drew his heavy broadsword. He didn't feel fear. He felt the familiar, comforting rhythm of his grandfather's teachings echoing in his mind. He stepped out from behind the boulder. Chapter 60, The Grand Master's Gaze. The boar's small, red eyes snapped toward Surya. It let out a deafening squeal that shook the leaves from the trees, kicking up dirt as it charged. An iron-hide boar's charge was essentially a biological battering ram. Most disciples would attempt to dodge or use complex movement arts to strike its soft underbelly. Surya didn't move. He lowered his stance, pointing the tip of his heavy sword toward the dirt. He inhaled deeply, the chi in his meridians spiraling like a dormant cyclone. High above, sitting in his wooden temple at the peak of the mountain, Grand Master Vashistha watched through his spiritual sense. He wanted to see how the commoner handled a beast of the same cultivation level. Hundreds of miles away, Rudra sat in his rocking chair, his eyes closed, his mid-Grand Master senses easily bridging the distance, watching his grandson with quiet pride. The boar was 10 feet away. 5 feet. Surya moved. He didn't swing wildly. He executed the heaven-cleaving starfall art. His body pivoted, bringing the heavy iron blade up and then bringing it down in a flawless, spiraling arc. The sword didn't just cut, it carried the entire weight of Surya's dense blood and the spiraling vortex of his chi. Shhhhhk. There was no sound of metal striking armor. There was only the wet, whispering sound of flesh parting. Surya stood frozen in his follow-through stance, his sword extended. Behind him, the massive iron-hide boar continued its forward momentum for 2 more steps before neatly splitting directly down the middle. The 2 halves of the massive beast collapsed onto the damp soil, the cut so perfectly smooth that the beast's core rolled out onto the grass, completely intact. At the peak of the mountain, Vashistha's eyes shot open. That wasn't the mountain cleaver art, the Grand Master whispered, a chill running down his ancient spine. That was perfection. In Sector 4, Rudra smiled, rocking gently in his chair. The storm was gathering, but his grandson was learning how to be the lightning. Chapter 61, The Butcher's Precision. The mist valleys were utterly silent following the death of the iron-hide boar. The sheer, overwhelming dominance of Surya's strike had sent a primal warning to the lesser beasts lurking in the shadows. Surya stood over the bisected carcass, the heavy iron broadsword resting on his shoulder. He took a slow breath, letting his spiraling chi settle back into his danshan. The heaven-cleaving starfall art was devastating, but it had drained a quarter of his chi pool in a single swing. He knelt in the damp mud, pulling a small skinning knife from his belt. Harvesting a beast was a messy, precise chore. He started with the beast core. Wedged in the center of the boar's chest cavity, the core was the size of a golf ball, glowing with a dull, earthy brown light. It smelled faintly of ozone and dried blood. He wiped it clean with a handful of moss and slipped it into a leather pouch. Next was the hide. The calcified, iron-like armor plates were incredibly tough. Surya had to channel his mid-blood refining chi into the tiny skinning knife just to cut the connective tissues. It took him 2 hours to carefully peel the plates away, rolling them into a heavy, pungent bundle. When he finally trekked back up the mountain stairs, his grey uniform was stained with mud and beast blood. He carried the massive roll of iron hide over his shoulder like a sack of grain. In the mission hall, the board clerk almost dropped his ink brush when Surya unrolled the flawless hide onto the wooden counter. Not a single tear in the central plating, the clerk muttered, running a hand over the thick armor. A perfect bisection. What did you use? An earth-tier guillotine. A broadsword, Surya replied quietly. The clerk handed over a heavy pouch of wooden merit tokens. 150 points. It was enough to eat high-tier beast meat for a month. Surya thanked him, unaware of the eyes tracking him from the shadows of the hall. Chapter 62, The Sweeper in the Shadows. The Vidyapith was a machine that required constant maintenance. While inner court disciples cultivated, the outer court disciples and hired menials swept the massive stone courtyards, scrubbed the moss from the pagodas, and cleared the incense ash from the shrines. Sweeping the eastern courtyard, a young man in a tattered brown tunic moved with mechanical rhythm. His name was Vane. To the passing nobles, Vane was just another nameless peasant hired from the surrounding villages. His posture was slumped, his eyes downcast. But beneath the ragged tunic, Vane's blood flowed with the chilling, icy viscosity of the late blood refining realm. He was the initiate sent by the Venom sect. Vane's sweeping brought him close to the mission hall just as Surya walked out. Vane kept his head down, the bristles of his broom scraping against the stone. Swish! 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 He focused his senses. The boy walking past him smelled of fresh beast blood. Vane's highly trained assassin instincts immediately analyzed Surya. The gait was perfectly balanced. There were no wasted movements. Every step was anchored to the earth. Mid-blood refining, Vane noted mentally, his eyes tracking the mud on Surya's boots. The sect leader was right. A commoner advancing this fast is unnatural. But he is still green. His guard is relaxed in the safe zones. Vane didn't project any killing intent. He simply swept the dust, committing the exact frequency of Surya's heartbeat and breathing pattern to memory. He was a shadow, and he had plenty of time to find the boy's fatal flaw. Chapter 63, The Scent of Iron and Tea. Life in Sector 4 moved at a delightfully mundane pace. The morning market was a chaotic symphony of shouting vendors, honking auto rickshaws, and the smell of fried spices. Rudra walked through the crowded bazaar, a woven wicker basket hanging from his arm. He wore a simple beige kurta, his white hair combed back neatly. He stopped at a vegetable stall. The vendor, a stout woman wiping sweat from her brow, smiled. "Ah, Rudraji! You're early today. The eggplants are fresh, just brought in from the southern farms." "I will take half a kilo, Sunita," Rudra smiled warmly, inspecting the purple vegetables. "My daughter-in-law wants to make pakaras this evening." To the casual observer, he was a frail, loving grandfather picking out vegetables. But beneath the surface, Rudra's reality was entirely different. His mid-grandmaster aura was drawn inward so tightly that it formed a microscopic second skin. If a speeding truck were to hit him right now, the truck would crumple into an accordion while Rudra wouldn't even spill a drop of his tea. As Sunita weighed the eggplants on a rusted iron scale, Rudra's eyes drifted toward a dark alleyway across the street. His sweeping grandmaster senses, which passively covered the entire city, caught a flicker of hostile chi. Two rival street gangs were drawing switchblades over a territory dispute. Rudra paid Sunita, handing her a few crumpled notes. He didn't look at the alley. He simply blinked. 50 yards away, a localized, invisible spike of atmospheric pressure slammed down on the alley. The switchblades in the gang members' hands instantly snapped in half, the metal shattering into harmless fragments. The thugs fell to their knees, their inner ears suddenly overwhelmed by acute vertigo. "Keep the change, Sunita," Rudra said kindly, turning to walk home, leaving the terrified, disoriented gang members scrambling away from the haunted alley. Chapter 64, A Summons to the Peak. Back at the Vidyapith, Surya was soaking in a hot wooden tub in his villa, trying to scrub the dried mud from his hair, when a sharp rap came at his door. He quickly dried off and dressed. Standing outside was Instructor Harish, his face pale and serious. "The Grand Master summons you to the High Pavilion immediately," Harish said, his voice tight. Surya's heart skipped a beat. Had he done something wrong? He followed Harish across the mist bridge, his heavy boots clacking softly against the condensed air. When he entered the simple wooden temple, Grand Master Vashistha was not sitting on his mat. He was standing by the open window, looking down at the mist valleys. On a small table nearby lay the heavily edited Mountain Cleaver Broadsword Art Manual. "Surya," Vashistha rumbled, not turning around. "My spiritual sense watches the mountain. I saw you strike the iron-hide boar." Surya bowed. "It was a messy hunt, Grand Master. I am still learning." "Messy?" Vashistha turned, his ancient eyes locking onto Surya with terrifying intensity. "That strike was structurally flawless. It defied the fundamental limits of an Earth-tier technique. I sent a disciple to your room to retrieve your manual." Vashistha pointed a trembling finger at the book. "Who redrew these diagrams?" Surya looked at the manual, his throat dry. He knew he couldn't lie to a Grand Master. I do not know, Elder," Surya said honestly. "I woke up, and it was there. Just like my apprentice manual back in the city." Chapter 65, The Guardian's Alibi. Vashistha frowned, the spiritual pressure in the room unconsciously increasing, making the wooden beams creak. "You do not know? A cultivator of supreme skill alters an Earth-tier manual into a Heaven-tier masterpiece, and you do not know who they are." Vashistha picked up the book, flipping to the page where Rudra had drawn the spiraling chi vortex. "Did they breach the villa? Did you not sense their chi?" "No, Elder," Surya swallowed hard. "I sensed nothing. But, they left something else." "What?" Vashistha demanded. "A token? A threatening letter? A sweet laddu? And my old steel thermos filled with water." The silence that followed was deafening. Vashistha stared at the commoner boy, his mouth slightly open. A sweet laddu. The Vidyapith was protected by the 9 heavens cloud array. It was a defensive formation created by the founding ancestors. It could detect a mosquito crossing the wards. It could withstand a direct siege from an army of meridian opening experts. And someone had bypassed it completely, without triggering a single alarm, walking into the heavily guarded inner court, just to edit a book and drop off a homemade dessert. Vashistha slowly sat down on his straw mat, the color draining from his face. The implications were horrifying. Only a cultivator whose understanding of world laws completely eclipsed the mountain's arrays could do this. A Grand Master, Vashistha realized, his heart hammering. There is another Grand Master in this world. And he is treating my most secure fortress like a public park. Elder?" Surya asked, worried by the old man's silence. Vashistha rubbed his face, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. "Go back to your training, Surya. And If this ghost brings you any more sweets, do be sure to thank him. Chapter 66, The Inner Court. Marketplace. Relieved to be dismissed, Surya headed toward the inner court marketplace. It was a bustling courtyard lined with stone stalls, where disciples traded herbs, beast parts, and forged weapons. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and the rhythmic clink-clank of blacksmiths' hammers. Surya needed a better weapon. The standard iron broadsword he had bought was already showing micro-fractures from the sheer force of his starfall strike. He bypassed the lavish stalls owned by the aristocratic factions, recognizing their inflated prices. Instead, he stopped at a small, soot-stained tent near the edge of the market. Inside, a burly, heavily scarred disciple was striking a piece of red-hot steel on an anvil. He wore a leather apron over his bare, heavily muscled chest. Looking to buy or sell, the blacksmith grunted, not looking up from his work. Name's Tarun. If you want pretty engravings to impress the girls, go to the Jade Pavilion stalls. If you want something that cuts bone, you're in the right place. I need a custom broadsword, Surya said, placing his heavy bundle onto the dusty wooden counter. He unrolled it, revealing the perfect iron-hide boar armor. He then placed the glowing beast core next to it. Tarun stopped hammering. He lowered his tongs, staring at the flawless hide. He reached out, running a calloused, soot-stained thumb over the calcified plates. Perfect bisection, Tarun muttered, looking up at Surya with newfound respect. No wasted material. You want me to forge this hide into the steel? Yes, Surya said. And I want it heavy. Heavier than anything you've ever made. Chapter 67, Forging the Black Steel. Tarun grinned, showing a row of white teeth against his soot-stained face. I like you. Come back at midnight. The forge needs to be perfectly dark to read the heat of the beast core. When Surya returned that night, the marketplace was empty. Tarun's tent was illuminated only by the angry, roaring orange glow of the forge. Watch closely, Tarun said, his face slick with sweat. He was a peak blood refining cultivator, and he used his chi not to fight, but to fuel the flames. Tarun placed layers of high-carbon steel onto the anvil, folding them together. Then, he took the iron hide plates and ground them into a coarse powder. Using a chi-infused mortar, he sprinkled the calcified beast armor dust over the white-hot steel, folding it in again and again. The heat was suffocating. Surya stood back, watching the master at work. Finally, Tarun took the earthy brown beast core. He didn't smash it. He placed it in a crucible, melting it down into a glowing, viscous liquid. He quenched the freshly shaped, massive broadsword directly into the liquid core. HSSSSSSSS. A massive cloud of foul-smelling steam erupted in the tent. The blade screamed, absorbing the primal earth chi of the boar. When the steam cleared, Tarun pulled the blade out. It was a terrifying weapon. It didn't shine. The metal was a matte, abyssal black, completely absorbing the light. It was over 5 feet long, nearly a foot wide at the tip, and looked thick enough to be a boat oar. The iron bore cleaver, Tarun panted, dropping it onto the stone table. The table cracked under the sheer weight. 80 pounds of compressed black steel. That will be 100 merit points. Surya paid him, gripping the hilt wrapped in cured leather. He lifted it. It was heavy, brutal, and perfect. Chapter 68, The Spy's first move. The next day, Surya carried the massive black sword strapped to his back, wrapped in coarse linen. It drew stares from the nobles, who scoffed at the unrefined, barbaric size of the weapon. At noon, the dining pavilion was packed. Disciples sat at long wooden tables, eating bowls of spirit rice and roasted beast meat. Vane, the Venom sect spy disguised in his menial tunic, was clearing dirty bowls from a nearby table. He saw Surya walking down the aisle, carrying a tray of food. Now, Vayne thought. He needed to test the density of Surya's chi to report back to the sect leader. Vayne expertly altered his trajectory, making it look as though he had slipped on a patch of spilled broth. He stumbled forward, bracing himself, intentionally bumping his shoulder directly into Surya's chest. As he made contact, Vayne secretly flared a concentrated spike of his late blood refining chi, aiming to jolt Surya's meridians and gauge his reaction. But the moment Vayne's shoulder hit Surya, it felt as though he had run full speed into a moving mountain. Surya's flawless, highly compressed mid-blood refining chi reacted instinctively to the foreign energy. It didn't just block Vayne's spike, it violently rebounded it. Vayne's eyes went wide beneath his mop of hair. He bit his tongue to stop from crying out as the rebound forcefully shoved his own chi back down his arm, numbing his fingers instantly. He bounced off Surya and crashed into the wooden table, sending dirty bowls clattering to the floor. "Ah! My apologies, young master." Vayne immediately groveled, dropping to his knees and frantically sweeping up the broken bowls, perfectly playing the terrified servant. Surya didn't spill his tray. He stood perfectly still, staring down at the sweeping servant. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. A normal servant's shoulder would have dislocated, hitting his dense flesh. "Be careful," Surya said evenly, walking away. Vayne kept his head down, his heart racing. A mid-blood refining body that effortlessly repels late blood refining chi, Vayne thought, cold sweat dripping down his spine. The sect leader must be informed tonight. Chapter 69, The Midnight Warning. Late that night, Vayne crept out to the precipice of the ash quarters. He pulled a tiny, intricately carved bamboo tube from his pocket. Inside was a spirit moth, a delicate insect bred specifically for long-distance, encrypted communication. He wrote a tiny, coded message on a slip of rice paper. "Target's vessel is flawless. Outperforms late blood refining. Requesting permission to use neurotoxin to cripple." He tied the paper to the moth's leg, infused it with a drop of his blood, and released it. The moth fluttered up, blending instantly into the mist, flying south toward the jungles. 300 miles away, Rudra was asleep in his bed. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open in the darkness. His Grandmaster aura, which covered the entire eastern seaboard like an invisible spider web, felt a microscopic pluck on one of its strands. He sat up. He didn't move his body, he moved his mind. His consciousness shot out, traversing the hundreds of miles in a fraction of a second, intercepting the exact spatial coordinates of the spirit moth. Flying through the night sky. Rudra's consciousness hovered around the moth. He read the coded message through sheer spiritual pressure. Neurotoxin, Rudra thought, a terrifying, glacial anger freezing the air in his bedroom. The venom sect still breathes. He didn't kill the moth. That would alert the spies. Instead, using his absolute mastery over minor details, Rudra used his intent to microscopically alter the ink on the rice paper. He changed the message to read, "Target is mediocre. Stuck at low blood refining. Awaiting further observation. No action required." Rudra let the moth continue its journey south, smiling coldly in the dark. Chapter 70, Cultivating the Void. Ignorant of the shadow war being fought over his head, Surya stood in the moonlit bamboo grove behind his villa. He unwrapped the iron bore cleaver. The black steel seemed to swallow the moonlight. He planted his feet and began to cycle the heaven-cleaving starfall art. He wanted to push toward the late blood refining realm. The key to this stage was not just compressing the blood, but infusing it with the intent of the weapon. The blood had to become as sharp as the sword. Surya began to swing. He didn't use targets. He simply swung the massive 80-pound blade at the empty air. Vwoom! Vwoom! Each swing was incredibly slow, agonizingly precise. He visualized the heavy black steel becoming an extension of his arm. He felt the pure, primal earth chi from the beast core seeping into his palms, traveling up his forearms, and merging with his thick, crimson blood. Hours passed. The sweat on his skin steamed in the cool night air. His muscles burned, screaming for rest, but the flawlessly edited manual forced the chi to soothe the micro-tears instantly, allowing him to endure an impossible workload. As the sun began to peak over the horizon, casting a golden hue over the eastern Ghats, Surya brought the massive sword down one final time. The air didn't just part, it shrieked. A visible shockwave of compressed, iron-heavy chi tore into the earth, carving a trench 3 feet deep and 10 feet long across the bamboo grove. Surya rested the flat of the heavy blade against his shoulder, exhaling a long, steady breath of white mist. His blood flowed with a heavy, unstoppable momentum. The late blood-refining realm was within sight, and he was ready to carve his way there. Chapter 71, The Weight of Routine. The heavy black steel of the iron bore cleaver demanded absolute discipline. For the next 2 weeks, Surya's life fell into a grueling, rhythmic routine. He woke an hour before dawn, the mountain air biting and cold. He would unwrap the cured leather hilt of his massive broadsword. The leather was already stained dark with his sweat, molding perfectly to the shape of his calloused palms. He spent 2 hours in the bamboo grove, practicing the heaven-cleaving starfall art. He didn't swing fast. Speed with an 80-pound blade would tear his shoulder sockets apart. Instead, he practiced the slow, spiraling descent of the chi. Letting gravity and his incredibly dense mid-blood refining muscles do the work. Each swing ended with the blade stopping precisely 1 millimeter above the dew-covered grass, requiring terrifying muscular control. In the ash quarters, Vane the sweeper was losing his mind. He had received the return message via spirit moth from the Venom sect leader. The parchment, stamped with the sect's official seal, read, "Target is mediocre. Awaiting further observation. No action required." Vane stared at the tiny rice paper, gripping his broom handle until the wood splintered. Mediocre? He had literally rebounded off the boy's chest like a fly hitting a stone wall. How could the sect leader call that mediocre? Did his initial message get corrupted in transit? Vane watched from the shadows as Surya walked toward the dining hall, his massive black sword strapped to his back. The assassin's pride, honed through years of bloody trials in the southern jungles, flared hotly. He decided he would not stand down. He would expose the boy's true strength, even if he had to bleed him to do it. Chapter 72, The Fragrance of Sandalwood. At mid-morning, Surya attended an inner court lecture in the Pavilion of Flowing Water. The room was built over a natural hot spring, filling the air with warm steam and the rich, calming scent of burning sandalwood. The instructor today was Elder Lin, a master of weapon intent. He was a slender man holding a plain bamboo stick. "The weapon is not a tool, it is a bridge," Elder Lin explained, his voice projecting effortlessly through the steam. He dropped a single, wet leaf from his hand. As it fell, he swung the bamboo stick. There was no sound. The leaf simply separated into 2 perfect halves before hitting the floor. To achieve weapon aura, your blood must recognize the weapon. The nobles among you, Lin gestured toward Aryan, who was glaring at Surya from the front row, his bruised ego still healing from the gravity pagoda, use rapiers and light swords. You project your chi outward, creating a sharp edge of energy. Elder Lin then looked at Surya, specifically at the massive black hilt protruding from over his shoulder. But heavy weapons do not project, Lin continued. They consume. A heavy blade must become a gravity well for your chi. If you try to push energy out of a broadsword, you will exhaust yourself in 3 swings. You must pull the world's weight into it. Surya's eyes widened slightly. The margin notes in his edited manual made perfect sense now. Let the blade fall like a dying star. Spiral the chi, do not force it. The spiral wasn't an attack, it was a vacuum to draw in kinetic energy. Chapter 73, The Dust of the Archives. To fully understand the beast core fused within his sword, Surya returned to the martial library. The mummified library elder was still sitting by the door, completely motionless. Surya noticed a fascinating minor detail: the dust motes floating in the shafts of sunlight completely avoided the elder. They danced around him in a perfect, 2-foot sphere, repelled by the passive, ancient chi radiating from the old man's skin. Surya bowed silently and headed to the archives section. He found a decaying scroll detailing earth core resonance. He sat on the wooden floorboards, reading carefully. The scroll explained that beasts like the iron-hide boar cultivated by absorbing the heavy, unyielding yin energy of the deep earth. To harmonize with a weapon forged from such a beast, the wielder needed to consume foods rich in earth element minerals, root vegetables, mountain salts, and aged vinegars to thicken the blood and match the blade's frequency. Earth minerals, Surya thought, rubbing his chin. He had been eating standard spirit rice and roasted bird meat. He needed something heavier. Something rooted in the dirt. As he walked out of the library, the elder's dry voice scraped the air. The blade is too heavy for your realm, boy. It will eat your chi. Only if I fight it, elder, Surya replied respectfully. I intend to let it fall. The elder didn't open his eyes, but a faint, dusty chuckle echoed in the hall. Chapter 74, A Parcel from the Slums. When Surya returned to his villa, he found a small, burlap-wrapped parcel resting on his porch. It bore the wax seal of the mundane postal courier service from Sector 4. Surya's heart leaped. He tore open the burlap. Inside was a thick woolen sweater, a letter, and a large glass jar sealed with wax and twine. He opened the letter. The neat, careful handwriting belonged to his mother, Meera. My dearest Surya, your father's business is doing wonderfully. We have moved to a beautiful new home with a garden. Grandpa spends all day rocking in his chair, watching the flowers. He says his joints haven't ached in months. I worried the mountain food would be too bland, so I made your favorite mango pickle. Eat well, study hard, and do not catch a cold. We love you. Surya smiled, pressing the letter against his chest. The mention of his grandfather sitting peacefully in a garden lifted a massive weight from his shoulders. He picked up the glass jar. It was filled with chunks of raw green mango, steeped in dark mustard oil, fenugreek, turmeric, and heavy mountain rock salt. It was the exact type of heavy, earth element food the library scroll had recommended. Hundreds of miles away, Rudra sat on his porch, a knowing smile on his face. He had secretly infused that specific batch of rock salt with a microscopic, perfectly diluted drop of Grandmaster Vitality, specifically tailored to thicken blood. Chapter 75, The Taste of Pickled Mango. Surya couldn't wait. He took a bowl of plain white rice from the dining hall and sat on his porch, opening the jar. The pungent, spicy, earthy aroma of mustard oil and aged mango filled the air. He scooped a generous spoonful onto his rice and took a bite. The crunch of the raw mango was loud in the quiet evening. The sourness hit his tongue first, followed by the fiery kick of the spices. But as he swallowed, something entirely unexpected happened. A profound, heavy warmth erupted in his stomach. It wasn't the violent, burning heat of a medicinal pill. It felt like a warm, heavy blanket wrapping around his internal organs. The rock salt, blessed by Rudra's invisible Grandmaster Chi, instantly dissolved into his bloodstream. The heavy earth minerals synchronized flawlessly with the heaven-cleaving starfall art. Surya felt his blood, already as thick as mercury, begin to darken, taking on a faint, almost metallic sheen. His heart pumped slower, but with terrifying, concussive force. Thump! Thump! The iron bore cleaver, leaning against the wooden railing, suddenly gave a faint, resonant hum, vibrating in tune with Surya's newly enriched blood. The friction between his body and the weapon had vanished. Chapter 76, The Sweeper's Trap. That night, a thick, unseasonal fog rolled into the eastern Ghats, blanketing the bamboo grove in a suffocating grey haze. Vane stood among the bamboo stalks, dressed in his black combat suit, having discarded the sweeper's tunic. He held a cylindrical bamboo tube in his hand, a lethal, concealed weapon known as the 1,000 Weeping Needles. The needles were coated in a paralytic sap harvested from the southern swamps. It wouldn't kill, but it would numb the meridians instantly. He knew Surya came here every night to practice. I will paralyze him, drag him down the mountain, and extract the truth from his veins, Vane thought, his late blood refining chi suppressing his body heat until he was as cold as the fog around him. The sect leader will reward me when he sees the boy's secrets. Footsteps approached. Heavy, deliberate, and perfectly spaced. Through the fog, the silhouette of Surya emerged. He carried the massive black broadsword loosely in his right hand, the tip dragging slightly against the earth, drawing a deep furrow in the soil. Vane held his breath. He aimed the bamboo cylinder directly at Surya's chest, waiting for the boy to step into the clearing. Chapter 77, The Midnight Ambush. The moment Surya stepped past the tree line, Vane twisted the base of the cylinder. Thwip 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 thwip. Dozens of hair-thin, black needles shot through the fog with the speed of bullets, completely silent. Surya's perfectly aligned senses screamed. He didn't have time to see the needles, but his skin felt the microscopic displacement of the air. He didn't try to dodge. His body was too heavy, and the needles covered too wide an area. Instead, he relied on the pure, gravitational pull of the Starfall art. He violently twisted his waist, bringing the 80-pound iron bore cleaver up in a defensive arc, using its massive surface area as a shield. Ping! 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 The needles struck the black steel, sparking faintly before dropping to the dirt. But Vane was a professional. He had aimed a second volley slightly lower. 3 needles bypassed the sword and struck Surya's left thigh, piercing his tough trousers and burying themselves a millimeter into his flesh. Surya grunted, stumbling backward. From the fog, Vane dashed forward, drawing a curved dagger. It's over, commoner. That sap paralyzes a late blood refiner in 3 seconds. Chapter 78, Unbreakable Iron. Surya looked down at his thigh. He felt the cold, numbing sensation of the swamp sap trying to invade his bloodstream. But Vane had miscalculated the terrifying density of Surya's perfectly forged vessel, newly enriched by the earth minerals of his mother's pickle. As the poison entered Surya's veins, his heavy, crimson blood reacted like a cornered beast. Instead of circulating the poison to his heart, the dense blood immediately coagulated around the entry wounds, trapping the toxins in localized pockets of deadened flesh. 3 seconds? Surya asked, his voice echoing in the fog, incredibly calm. He pulled the 3 needles out of his thigh and dropped them. A few drops of thick, blackish blood fell to the grass, but his leg remained perfectly stable. Vane froze, his eyes widening behind his mask. Impossible. His blood is rejecting the toxin purely through physical density. You've been watching me, Surya said, his grip tightening on the cured leather hilt of his broadsword. The air around him began to warp as he cycled his chi. You're the sweeper from the eastern courtyard. You hold your broom like a spear. Vane panicked. He had been discovered. He channeled his entire late blood refining chi into his legs and lunged forward, thrusting his dagger at Surya's throat with desperate, blinding speed. Chapter 79, the silent eradication. Surya stepped into the guard. He raised the iron boar cleaver. The heavy blood in his veins spiraled in perfect unison with the starfall art. He didn't swing at Vane, he swung at the space Vane was occupying. Hundreds of miles away, Rudra was sitting in his living room in Sector 4. He had felt the Venom Sect assassin make his move. Rudra raised his hand, pointing a single finger toward the darkness of his empty room. If Surya kills him, the boy will bear the trauma of taking a human life too early, Rudra thought. I will handle the trash. As Surya's massive black blade descended toward Vane, Vane realized he couldn't block it. The sheer gravitational force of the strike was locking him in place. In a panic, Vane attempted to detonate his own meridians, a suicide art meant to take his enemy with him in a blast of corrosive chi. Back in the city, Rudra flicked his finger. A microscopic, utterly undetectable needle of Mid-Grandmaster spatial law bypassed the physical distance and materialized directly inside Vane's Danshan. Before Vane could detonate, his chi pool was instantly, silently crushed into absolute nothingness. The power in his legs vanished. Surya's broadsword descended. Realizing the assassin had suddenly frozen, Surya forcefully pulled his swing at the last millisecond. Unwilling to cleave a defenseless man in half, the black blade stopped 3 inches from Vane's face. But the sheer, terrifying wave of compressed air generated by the starfall art slammed into Vane like a solid brick wall. The blunt force trauma shattered Vane's nose and knocked him unconscious instantly, sending him tumbling backward into the bamboo stalks. Chapter 80, The Late Blood Refining Realm. Surya stood over the unconscious assassin, panting heavily. The adrenaline of the ambush, combined with the lingering, heavy earth chi from the pickled mango, created a perfect storm within his body. His blood roared. It felt as though a dam had finally burst. The heavy, metallic blood completely saturated every inch of his marrow, expanding his internal capacity. His muscles tightened, compressing even further, shedding the last remnants of soft mortal tissue. A visible ring of dust exploded outward from his boots, flattening the grass in a 10-foot radius. Surya closed his eyes, feeling the immense, grounding power flowing through his veins. He had reached the late blood refining realm. Far away, in the quiet suburbs of Sector 4, Rudra closed his eyes as the familiar, glorious chime rang in his soul. Ding! Descendant Surya has reached the late blood refining realm. Upgrading host to late Grandmaster realm. Rudra didn't move, but the atmosphere above the house did. For a single, fleeting second, the clouds above Sector 4 were perfectly, geometrically parted in a massive circle, revealing the stars. The sheer martial intent of a late Grandmaster had pushed the very atmosphere away. Rudra exhaled, the clouds rushing back in to fill the void. The earth paths are nearly conquered, my boy, Rudra whispered into the night, looking toward the mountains. Soon, you will touch the sky. Chapter 81, The Bamboo Bonds. The fog in the bamboo grove hung thick and heavy, carrying the metallic scent of Surya's newly enriched blood and the damp earth he had displaced. Surya stood over the unconscious assassin. He didn't sheath the iron boar cleaver, he let its tip rest on the soil, grounding his excess energy. He knelt beside Vane, pulling the man's black mask down. The face underneath was plain, unremarkable, the face of a sweeper nobody would ever look twice at. But when Surya pulled back the collar of Vane's combat suit to check his pulse, he saw it. Branded into the flesh of the man's collarbone was a small, intricate tattoo of a coiled green serpent with 2 heads. Surya's eyes narrowed. He didn't know the symbol, but he knew sect brands. This was a professional assassin, not a hired thug from the nobles. Moving with deliberate, controlled motions, Surya walked to the edge of the grove. He used his skinning knife to slice several long, green strips of fresh bamboo bark. Bamboo bark, when stripped green, possessed incredible tensile strength. He returned to Vane, binding the man's wrists and ankles with tight, unforgiving knots, wrapping the bark multiple times until it cut slightly into the suit. He slung the massive 80-pound broadsword onto his back. Then, grabbing Vane by the collar of his suit, Surya dragged the unconscious assassin out of the grove. The heavy thud of Vane's boots bouncing against the stone path echoed loudly in the quiet night as Surya marched directly toward the instructor's pavilion. Chapter 82, The Collapsed Star. Instructor Harish was drinking a bitter herbal tea, going over the patrol rosters, when a sharp knock rattled his wooden door. He opened it to find Surya standing there, completely unharmed, casually holding an unconscious man wrapped in black combat gear by the scruff of his neck. "I was ambushed in the bamboo grove, Instructor," Surya said, his voice carrying the deep, resonant hum of the late blood-refining realm. "He used paralytic needles and a dagger. He bears a serpent brand on his collarbone." Harish dropped his teacup. It shattered, hot tea pooling over the patrol rosters. He stared at the tattoo, his face draining of color. The Venom Sect. A sleeper agent in the Vidyapith. Within 10 minutes, Vane was dragged up the mist bridge to the central peak, thrown onto the stone floor of Grand Master Vashistha's temple. The Grand Master sat on his mat, his ancient eyes fixed on the assassin. "Wake him," Vashistha commanded. Harish pinched a specific nerve on Vane's neck. The assassin gasped, his eyes flying open in sheer panic. He tried to cycle his chi to break his bamboo bonds, but his face immediately contorted in absolute horror. My chi!" Vane choked out, thrashing wildly like a fish out of water. "Where is my Danshan?" Vashistha frowned. He extended his spiritual sense, probing Vane's body. What he found made the Grand Master's hands tremble beneath his wide sleeves. Vane's meridians weren't cut. His Danshan wasn't pierced. It was simply gone. The space where his chi pool used to reside had been collapsed inward, crushed into a microscopic singularity by an application of spatial law so terrifyingly precise that it hadn't harmed a single surrounding internal organ. A late Grand Master, Vashistha thought, cold sweat beading on his ancient forehead. Only a late Grand Master on the verge of the void-treading realm can manipulate space with such surgical violence. Vashistha looked up at Surya. The boy was looking at the assassin with mild confusion, completely unaware that a god walked invisibly behind him. "Take the prisoner to the dungeons," Vashistha ordered Harish, his voice uncharacteristically strained. "And Surya, you have done well. Rest." Chapter 83, The Consequence of Density. When Surya returned to his villa and the adrenaline finally faded, he immediately noticed the physical consequences of his breakthrough. He walked to his wooden desk and sat down in his sturdy oak chair. Crack! The chair instantly splintered beneath him. Surya caught himself before he hit the floor, hovering in a deep squat. He looked at the shattered wood in bewilderment. He wasn't actively projecting chi. But the late blood-refining realm meant his blood had crystallized into a fluid denser than mercury. His physical mass had increased drastically, even though his physical size remained the same lean, corded shape. He now weighed nearly 300 pounds. He walked to the wash basin to splash water on his face. As he leaned over, his heartbeat slow, but incredibly powerful, sent microscopic vibrations through his chest cavity. He watched in fascination as the water in the porcelain basin formed perfectly concentric ripples in time with his pulse. Thump! Thump! "I am too heavy," Surya muttered to himself. He realized that if he sparred with an apprentice realm disciple now, an accidental brush of his shoulder would shatter their collarbone. He spent the rest of the night practicing basic mortal movements. Walking across the floorboards without making them creak. Picking up a fragile ceramic teacup without crushing it into powder. It was an agonizing, tedious exercise and supreme physical control, far harder than swinging his broadsword. By dawn, he could finally sit on the edge of his bed without breaking the frame. He was learning to tether his immense mass. Chapter 84, The Edge of the Void. Hundreds of miles away, the morning sun bathed Sector 4 in a warm, golden glow. Rudra sat on his porch, holding a cup of Mira's freshly brewed ginger tea. The world looked different this morning. Having reached the late Grand Master realm, the physical world felt delightfully soft, like clay waiting to be molded. The air pressure, the pull of gravity, the magnetic fields of the earth, they were no longer absolute laws, they were suggestions. Rudra watched a dry autumn leaf detach from the banyan tree. He didn't use his hands. He didn't blow on it. He simply focused his martial intent on the space beneath the leaf. The localized gravity around the leaf inverted. The dry leaf stopped falling, hovering perfectly still in mid-air. With another thought, the leaf gently floated sideways and landed neatly on the edge of his tea saucer. Fascinating, Rudra murmured. He was approaching the absolute peak of the earthly paths. The next realm void treading would allow him to sever his ties to the earth entirely. His sweeping, passive spiritual sense covered the entire state of West Bengal. He could feel the chaotic, bustling chi of millions of mortals, the faint, flickering embers of low-level cultivators hiding in the cities, and the terrified, tightly sealed chi of the Venom sect far in the south. They have closed their doors, Rudra noted, sensing the massive array sealing the underground caverns. They cower like rats in a burrow. Let them stay there. If they poke their heads out again, I will collapse their cavern from my rocking chair. Chapter 85, The Forge and the Calluses. Back at the Vidyapith, Surya visited the marketplace at noon. The heavy black broadsword was strapped to his back, drawing the usual sneers from the passing nobles. He walked to Tarun's soot-stained tent. The burly blacksmith was hammering a piece of red-hot steel, the sweat gleaming on his heavily scarred back. Surya unstrapped the iron bore cleaver and placed it gently on the wooden counter, making sure not to crack the wood with his new weight. Tarun finished his hammering and walked over, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He picked up a vial of mineral oil and a coarse whetstone. As Tarun began to oil the black blade, he paused. He looked up at Surya, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the terrifying, contained vitality radiating from the boy. "You're heavier," Tarun grunted, his voice gruff. "I don't mean fat. You're pulling the earth beneath your boots." "Late blood refining." Surya nodded respectfully. "Last night." Tarun let out a low whistle, shaking his head. A commoner reaching late blood refining in his first year. The Jade Pavilion snobs must be choking on their silver spoons. Good. Tarun aggressively rubbed the oil into the porous black steel. "Your sword drinks the oil perfectly. It's maturing. But listen to me, Surya. The higher you climb, the bigger the target on your back. The inner court is preparing for the Mountain Depths expedition next week. The nobles will try to exclude you, or worse, use you as beast bait in the mist. Let them try," Surya said, a calm, cold certainty in his eyes. Chapter 86, The Ranking Monument. Surya headed toward the central plaza of the inner court. Towering in the center of the courtyard was a massive slab of smooth black obsidian. It was the inner court ranking monument. Names were carved into the stone with chi, glowing with a faint blue light. The higher the name, the stronger the disciple. Surya stood near the back of the crowd, reading the top names. 1. Vikram of the Sunbird clan, low meridian opening, 2. Yash of the Northern Heavy Blades, low meridian opening, 3. Ravi of the Silvercrest lineage, peak blood refining. Surya's eyes lingered on the third name. Silvercrest. Julian's older cousin. The aristocratic family's reach extended deep into the Vidyapith. "Looking for your name, commoner," a mocking voice sneered. Surya turned slowly. Standing behind him was Aryan, the noble he had humiliated in the Gravity Pagoda. But Aryan wasn't alone today. Beside him stood a tall, impeccably dressed young man holding an intricately carved scabbard. He radiated the sharp, biting chi of the peak blood refining realm. It was Ravi Silvercrest. He won't find it, Ravi said. Smoothly, adjusting the cuffs of his silk robe. The monument only tracks those who complete high-tier faction missions. Slaying a single boar does not earn you a place among dragons. The surrounding disciples fell silent, stepping back to give the nobles space. The tension in the air was palpable. Chapter 87, The Weight of Silence. Surya didn't rise to the bait. He looked at Ravi with the same detached calmness he used to observe a falling leaf. I am not looking for my name, Surya said quietly. I am just reading the stone. Ravi's eye twitched. The commoner's lack of fear was infuriating. I heard you had a lucky breakthrough. Late blood refining. Impressive for a slum rat. But the Mountain Depths expedition requires a 5-man squad. I am the captain of Squad 3. I strongly suggest you sit this expedition out, Surya. Accidents happen in the deep mist. It was a blatant threat. Surya fully turned to face Ravi. He didn't draw his sword. He didn't step into a stance. He simply stopped actively suppressing his physical density. He allowed the sheer, terrifying weight of his late blood refining aura, forged flawlessly by a heaven-tier manual and enriched by Grandmaster blessed earth minerals, to bleed into the space between them. The air grew instantly heavy. The ambient dust particles floating between them plummeted to the stone floor. Ravi, who had expected the wild, unrefined chi of a commoner, suddenly felt as though a massive boulder had been dropped on his chest. His sharp, needle-like peak blood refining aura slammed against Surya's heavy aura, and Ravi's aura instantly shattered like glass hitting an iron anvil. Ravi staggered backward a half step, his face turning pale, his breath catching in his throat. Aryan, standing slightly behind him, gasped for air, clutching his chest. Surya hadn't even blinked. I will join the expedition, Surya said, his voice quiet but echoing like a drum. And I will watch my own back. Excuse me. He turned and walked away, leaving the third-ranked disciple in the inner court trembling in a cold sweat, unable to utter a single word in response. Chapter 88, The Shuttered Caverns. Deep in the southern jungles, the Venom sect was in lockdown. The sect leader paced furiously in front of his bone throne. The massive stone doors to the cavern were sealed with thousands of talismans, glowing with protective runes. He didn't just kill Vayne, the sect leader muttered to himself, pulling at his scarred face. The soul jade is intact. But Vayne's connection to the world is totally severed. The Grandmaster erased his Danshan without killing him. It's a warning. The handler stood shivering in the corner. My lord, the entire sect has been recalled. All external contracts are cancelled. We are bleeding funds. Fools care about funds, the wise care about their heads. The sect leader roared. That monster can bend space. If we step outside, he could decapitate me from 1,000 miles away. We do not leave these caverns until I break through to the Grandmaster realm myself. Even if it takes a decade. The notorious Venom sect, a terror of the criminal underworld, had effectively imprisoned itself. Terrified of an old man sitting on a suburban porch who just wanted his grandson to finish college in peace. Chapter 89, The Earth Breathes. The night before the Mountain Depths expedition, Surya sat in his room, packing his supplies. He packed tightly bound rolls of bandages, small clay jars of coagulation paste, and several wax-sealed rations of dried meat. Finally, he carefully packed the half-empty jar of Mira's pickled mango, treating it with more reverence than a high-tier medicinal pill. He opened the Primordial River Mountain Art Manual to review the breathing techniques for endurance. As he flipped the pages, he noticed a new, tiny line of elegant script added to the margins of the section on forest traversal. The earth breathes. The trees exhale. Do not cut through the forest, slip between its breaths. Step where the roots have already parted the soil. Surya ran his fingers over the dry ink. He still didn't know who was editing his books, but the advice was always infallible. He closed his eyes, visualizing the dense jungle of the mist valleys. He practiced slowing his heartbeat until it synchronized with the slow, ambient pulse of the mountain itself. He fell asleep sitting in the lotus position, the heavy iron bore cleaver resting across his knees, completely at peace. Chapter 90, The Descent. Dawn broke over the Vidyapith, painting the thick mist in hues of pale gold and bruised purple. 50 inner court disciples gathered at the massive iron gates leading to the descent trail. They were divided into 10 squads of 5. The air was thick with nervous energy. The depths of the mountain were not a controlled training ground, they were the domain of ancient beasts and deadly spiritual flora. Surya stood with Squad 7. To his mild surprise, his squad captain wasn't an arrogant noble. It was Vikram of the Sunbird clan, the number 1 ranked disciple in the inner court, a low meridian opening expert. Vikram was a tall, stoic young man with piercing hawk-like eyes, wielding a slender, curved sun blade. Also in the squad were 2 female disciples specializing in healing arrays, and a timid archer. Vikram looked over his squad. His eyes stopped on Surya, lingering on the absurdly massive black broadsword strapped to Surya's back. "Surya of Sector 4, Vikram said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I requested you for my squad. I saw the iron-hide boar armor you sold to the quartermaster. I need a vanguard who can hold the line against heavy beasts." "I will hold the line, Captain," Surya replied simply. "Good," Vikram nodded, turning toward the iron gates. "Stay close. Trust the healers. And do not draw blood unless necessary, the scent carries for miles down there." The massive iron gates groaned open, releasing a wave of cold, damp air smelling of ancient rot and wild magic. Surya adjusted the leather strap on his chest. He took a deep breath, slipping into the mental state his grandfather's notes had taught him, and stepped into the mist. The true hunt had begun. Chapter 91, The Breath of the Forest. The mist valleys swallowed Squad 7 the moment they stepped past the iron gates. The transition from the pristine, spiritual air of the Vidyapith to the primordial depths was physically jarring. The atmosphere here was thick, heavy with the scent of rotting ancient wood, damp ferns, and the metallic tang of hidden predators. The mist clung to their clothes like wet cobwebs, reducing visibility to a mere 30 feet. Vikram led the formation, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his slender sun blade. He moved with the crisp, efficient grace of a meridian opening expert, his chi passively repelling the dampness. Behind him were the twin healers, Neela and Riya, keeping close to the timid archer, Kiran. They were all in the mid-blood refining realm, struggling slightly to adapt to the uneven, moss-slicked terrain. Kiran stepped on a dry root hidden under the mud, causing a sharp snap that echoed loudly in the dense fog. Vikram paused, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't speak. Surya brought up the rear. Despite carrying the massive 80-pound iron bore cleaver on his back, he was entirely silent. He recalled the margin notes: the earth breathes. The trees exhale. Do not cut through the forest, slip between its breaths. Surya didn't march, he let his heavy, late blood refining body sink into the natural contours of the earth. He stepped exactly where the soil was already compacted by the ancient roots, avoiding the hollow patches of decaying leaves. His breathing slowed, syncing with the sluggish, creeping rhythm of the mist. Vikram glanced over his shoulder, expecting the vanguard to be lagging. Instead, he saw Surya moving like a ghost. The commoner's massive boots made zero sound. "Your footwork," Vikram whispered, his voice barely carrying over the dripping condensation. "It is not a Vidyapith technique. It is completely attuned to the environment." "Where did you learn it?" "From a very strict teacher, Captain," Surya replied softly, not breaking his rhythm. Vikram nodded slowly, his respect for the commoner deepening. "Keep your eyes peeled. The mist is getting thicker." Chapter 92, The Ghost Orchids. 2 hours into the descent, the terrain shifted. The massive oak trees gave way to a dense grove of pale, weeping willows. Clinging to the bark of these trees were clusters of translucent white flowers that seemed to glow in the dim light. "Stop, Neela," one of the healers hissed softly. She pulled a small leather-bound compendium from her belt. "Ghost orchids. They are spiritual flora. Are they valuable?" Kiran asked, reaching toward his quiver. "Only if you want to stop breathing," Ria answered, pulling a silk mask over her nose and mouth. "When disturbed, they release a spore cloud. It's a mild neurotoxin. It paralyzes the diaphragm. If you breathe it in, you suffocate in minutes. Tie your masks." The nobles quickly pulled out chi-infused silk masks, tying them tightly. Kiran handed an extra one toward Surya. "I don't have a mask," Surya admitted. "Take mine, I have a spare," Kiran offered. Nervously. "Save it," Surya said gently, pushing the mask back. He didn't explain that his late blood-refining body, having already conquered the venom sex concentrated sap, was practically immune to ambient flora toxins. His thick, dense blood would immediately isolate and crush the spores before they could reach his lungs. Vikram watched closely as Surya walked straight into the grove without a mask. A slight breeze rustled the willows, and a faint cloud of sparkling white dust drifted down, dusting Surya's shoulders and face. The squad held their breath, expecting the commoner to collapse, gasping for air. Surya just blinked the dust out of his eyelashes and kept walking, completely unaffected. His incredibly slow, heavy heartbeat thump, didn't even skip a rhythm. "His vessel," Neela whispered to her sister, her medical eyes wide with shock. "His blood density is filtering the poison purely through physical pressure. I've only read about that in ancient texts." Chapter 93, Tracking the Scythe past the orchid grove. He crouched by the base of a massive, petrified tree trunk. Surya moved to his side, his hand naturally resting on the leather hilt of his broadsword. The bark of the petrified tree, which was as hard as solid rock, had been sheared away in 3 massive, diagonal gashes. The cuts were so deep and smooth that sap was still weeping from the wound. "Not a boar. Not a wolf," Vikram muttered, tracing the cuts with his fingers. He felt the residual, chaotic chi lingering in the grooves. "A shadow mantis. Mid to late blood-refining beast." Kiran swallowed hard, his knuckles white as he gripped his bow. "A mantis? Sir, they are ambush predators. They camouflage perfectly in the mist. And their scythes can cut through standard steel like butter," Vikram agreed, standing up. His face was grim. "Keep your eyes on the canopy. They strike from above." Surya looked down at the ground. Among the displaced dirt and torn roots, he noticed something odd. The moss wasn't just disturbed by a beast's claws. There was a faint, boot-shaped indentation on a nearby rock, and smeared across it was a dark, pungent paste. Surya knelt, bringing his face close to the rock. The smell was cloying, like rotting meat and sweet flowers. "Captain," Surya called out softly. "Look at this." Chapter 94, The Sabotage of Silk. Vikram walked over, sniffing the air. His eyes instantly widened, and a flash of pure, aristocratic fury crossed his usually stoic face. "Blood musk," Vikram hissed, his voice trembling with anger. It is an alchemical paste used by hunters to draw predators out of their dens. It drives carnivorous beasts into a frenzy. A beast didn't leave this, Surya stated, looking at the boot print. No, Vikram said, standing up and drawing his sun blade. The slender weapon glowed with a faint, burning light. Another squad passed through here. They encountered the mantis, realized it was too dangerous, and smeared blood musk on this rock to draw the beast away from their trail, and directly onto ours. Who would do that? Neela gasped, drawing her twin daggers. Squad 3 was assigned the sector adjacent to ours, Vikram said coldly. Ravi Silvercrest. Surya's eyes darkened. Ravi hadn't just made a threat at the ranking monument, he had actively engineered an assassination attempt in the deep mist, using a frenzy-driven beast to do his dirty work. If Surya died here, the sect elders would just chalk it up to the hazards of the expedition. A sudden, faint clicking sound echoed from the mist above them. Click clack click. Formation. Vikram roared, his meridian opening chi erupting, bathing the clearing in a warm, golden light. Eyes up. Chapter 95,